Hello and good evening. My name is Stephen Cowan. I'm the leader of the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. Tonight, we are meeting to review the recent catastrophic flooding that happened in Hammersmith and Fulham. We understand it happened in different parts of London. We have an audience here of residents who've all suffered flooding and have all suffered really very upsetting set of circumstances as a consequence. Some people still living in temporary accommodation. And to answer the questions and to begin to see if we can develop the actions, then we have a panel of people. Starting from my left, would you like to introduce yourself, please, sir?
Hello, good evening. Hello, good evening. My name is Alex Nixon. I am the head of the London response to flooding, which hopefully kind of explains what I do.
Thank you. My name is Warren Buckley. I'm the retail director at Thames Water, and I'm a member of the executive team. And I'm here to represent Thames Water at a senior level tonight.
Okay. Brendan.
Hi, I'm Brendan Smith. I'm the chair of Better Brackenbury, and I represent approximately 150 people who were flooded on the 12th of July last year.
Bram.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Bram Kantz. I'm the Chief Officer of Public Realm at Hammersmith and Fulham Council.
And I understand we had invited the London Fire Brigade, who have a different perspective, and but they sadly can't come tonight. But we will be sharing all the information with them and trying to disseminate the advice that they also give to us. Okay, well, we have a lot of people with a lot of questions. Some of those questions will come from the audience in the room. Some of them have already been submitted on camera. But before we do that, we will start with a presentation from Thames Water, who will tell us their view and give us their insights to what's happened. Can I just explain, Brendan, can I just thank Brendan Smith? Brendan is a resident. He's not an elected representative. The reason he's here is he's developed an expert knowledge about the Thames Water flooding. And indeed, he has been a great aid to me and our team at the council in keeping us in touch with what's going on, the type of examples that have happened. And I am really very grateful. He's not paid for this, he's a volunteer. So if you're asking him questions, then please recognize that he's put himself up to help us and is in no way responsible for any actions. But so thank you, Brendan. I would like to formally thank you for your help. Okay, right. Are you guys ready for the presentation? All right.
Eva, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to join you tonight. Just to explain, as I say, I'm the retail director at Thames Water, and one of my responsibilities is customer service and customer experience. And therefore, this was a real opportunity to meet all of you, obviously, as residents affected, but obviously also clearly Thames Water customers. What we want to do tonight, along with Alex, is to give you an overview of our understanding of what happened, to start with a view of actually how we did in terms of the initial response. But importantly, also, Alex has been working very hard to understand what we could do going forwards, and we'll share some of the early thoughts around that and some of the different steps. What I want to start by doing on behalf of Thames Water and personally is to recognise, as the leader says, the catastrophic impact this has had on all of you. And we're incredibly thoughtful about that, very sympathetic to the huge personal impact. And I know for many of you, and I've spoken to many of our customers across London who've been impacted by this, appreciate that many of you may not be back in your homes and are facing very difficult situations. I'm going to, as we're going through, if we could go to the next slide, please. So as I say, we're going to run through a little bit around customer service and the response on the night and some work that we've already been doing on that. Then our understanding of what happened during the storms and why what happened to all of you took place. And then in terms of what we're doing to manage the situation with future flooding. I want to start by talking about customer service, and that's because there are two aspects, we believe, to looking at what happened during the flooding. The first aspect is how did we as Thames Water respond, and how did we support all of you and everyone who was impacted during that period. The second to understand is what is the cause. Now, the one thing, as I say, we'll come on to what are the cause, and talking about actually not only what we're doing now, but what we've set up to try and understand more of the cause. But what I want to be clear of very much when I'm looking at this element is that we recognise whatever the cause of the flooding was, our response was unacceptable. And hopefully you will find when we get into Q&A, I will be as honest and open as I possibly can be. So the response to what happened was simply unacceptable. And to call out a few things which I'm sure you experienced, the information on our website, the way in which we kept social media updated, to be frank, the way in which during that night we kept councillors, London Fire Brigade and others up to date was nowhere near the standards that we believe that we need to achieve as Thames Water. For anybody who called the contact centres, that's one of my responsibilities. You were waiting hours to be answered. And even when you got through, you couldn't get the information you were looking for. And in the days afterwards, when you were looking for our support was not good enough. And I hope there's no doubt in your mind of actually what happened and how we address that. So one of the first things we've done is we've done a whole internal study across that. It's something I've been working directly with Alex on and we've reviewed. And as you can see here, we've mapped out a number of key elements and our responses and actions to those. And I'm going to pick out just one or two of those elements. Just to be open a little bit, I joined Thames Water just under a year ago, 11 months ago, and this was the first very major incident since I joined, and quite frankly, I personally found it was completely unacceptable. I was called in, I was on the night, I was dealing with our people, and as you all know, quite frankly, that was not the fault of the people who were answering the phones. Actually, they were appalled by the level of service they were able to give you. So a few things that we've looked to do since then. We've been upgrading the whole of our website. That may sound a very basic thing, but we know that in this day and age, people often will go straight to our website and to social media to find out what's happening. And you want immediate information and you want it regularly updated. That's perfectly reasonable. And you want to know that we're working with councils, that we're working with flood response, we're working with the London Fire Brigade. You want to see how we're coordinating that. So that's one of the first things we've been looking at about how we can update that. We've updated our approach to social media and we've put new rules in place, which I've been personally monitoring to make sure that when there are incidents, we get information to customers straight away. We've increased the number of people in our contact centres. And one of the significant things we've been doing is cross-training all of our people, because you'll appreciate we don't have an incident every night. And therefore, actually, we have a certain number of people. We've been looking at how we can cross-train to have more people to answer calls in those situations. But I'm also pleased to say I've enacted a process. Some of you, I think, will have ended up in contact centres. They're not based in the UK, and I've already started to bring work back to the UK. And in fact, the commitment we're making is in the future. It's going to take me a little while. All of our calls will be answered by people, not just in the UK, but actually in the London and the Thames Valley area, so the Thames Water area, who we believe will have a better understanding of what you're going through as our customers and our residents, and better local knowledge. We've also been investing in some new systems because, quite frankly, there wasn't sufficient information available to the people when they were answering your calls to deal with those matters. So I won't go through because we're very happy to share. We've published a number of these different pieces of information. The second aspect I just want to highlight is that we didn't get people on the ground quickly enough. And certainly when I was talking to residents and customers, there was a real feeling that actually the next day there were too few people geared up in Thames Water environments, very visible, available to answer questions and available to give advice around cleanup in terms of the awful situation. Now, I know I've had feedback that 2 to 3 days later, there were many more people kind of available, but the reality is in the immediate time straight after that, there weren't enough people. So that's also something we're addressing by training more of our people, ensuring that actually when we do have incidents, we get people on site, for example, our emergency vehicles into the different sites so that they can make sure they respond and can offer not just assurance and information, but also advice about how to deal with different situations. And that clearly wasn't acceptable either. And then the last element, which I did highlight, is we've been reviewing the whole way that we collaborate with partners. When there's an incident such like this, it's not just about how we respond, it's about how we work with all of the partners. And therefore, we spend a lot of time looking at that, and hopefully partners feel that we've been open and honest about that and been looking to make real differences on that. What I can say, unfortunately, we did have a further incident, a different kind of incident before London, in North London, Northwest London, and we were able to actually test a number of these different elements, and I did receive positive feedback from customers and councillors on the progress we've made. But I want to assure you that's not the end of it. We've got an awful lot more to do and committed to do so, but we have now closed through 9 of these actions, and we intend to keep working on these over the next few months and improving the response we make to customers and residents when they're impacted. So I'm sure there may be some questions on that a little bit later, but I know you'll want to understand a little bit more about what we've done, our own investigations in terms of the events. But I did want to start with a very clear indication of the fact we know our response was not good enough, and we are determined to make sure that doesn't happen again. Alex, if I can pass to you.
Thank you, Warren. So I've got 2 roles to do tonight. First one is to set out our understanding of the flood, and then to say what we're going to be doing, working with others to try and manage that in the future. So on the understanding the flood, sort of 4 things I want to get across is who and what was flooded, why was the flooding so severe, how this storm compared to previous storms that we've had recently, and the impact of climate change is going to have on these kind of storms in the future. So what we've been doing is we've been working with the boroughs, community groups, London Fire Brigade, other agencies to try and understand who and what was flooded and how. And what I've got here is a simple map that sort of plots the properties that were flooded. We estimate from the 12th of July storm, nearly 1,000 properties were flooded. So this was a very significant amount of flooding, principally across these 4 boroughs you see here. So Hammersmith and Fulham, Kensington, Chelsea, Westminster and Camden, though other boroughs were also affected on that day. There was also obviously another significant storm on the 25th of July that affected more properties. We suspect there are actually more properties out there that have flooded and have not reported that to us. So if you haven't yet reported flooding to us, I've got on the slide there the link to our online sewer flooding questionnaire, or there are hard copies for people in the audience this evening on the white table over there. But please, that is the actual sort of starting point for helping us understand who and what was flooded. It helps us understand how the water came into your property, which properties were affected, and any details you can provide on the timeline of that helps us really get to the bottom of why this storm was so severe. And on that note, next slide, please. We think that we've been working trying to understand why was it so extensive. I mean, it was a very, very significant storm. We think the first reason was the intensity of the rainfall. So on the 12th of July, we had this massive summer convective storm. The Met Office has said there would be storms, but they said they'd be covering the whole of the southeast of England, and they forecasted between 20 and 30 millimetres of rain as the most likely outcome. And what we actually had was nearly 8 centimetres of rain over the Shepherd's Bush area over the 2 to 3 hours of the storm. And within 1 hour, we had nearly 5 centimetres of rain. That is a significant, almost tropical deluge that simply overwhelmed our system. Our system is not designed to deal with that kind of rainfall. Unfortunately, the rain fell in a low point, a former lost river of London, and that further concentrated the flows. And then as a sort of last part of the unholy trinity, our sewers couldn't overflow into the Thames because they were tide locked by the high flow. So when Bazalgette designed the system, he designed it to have this emergency release valve to overflow into the Thames. But because the tide was so high, the physical flaps that stopped the tide backing up into the sewer couldn't open. And therefore that water then backed up and further intensified the flooding. So we think those 3 key reasons are the key drivers of why that flooding was so intense. But I don't want you to accept my word for it. We have commissioned an independent review to impartially and independently get to the bottom of that. And I will talk a little bit more about that later. Next slide, please. So what I can show here, apologies, is probably coming up a bit pale for those of you in the room, but the green spikes basically show the rainfall, the big rainstorms going back to 2016. And the simple things I want you to take from this are, firstly, big rainstorms are not exactly infrequent. We have heavy rain a lot in London. But what is really striking about this was actually not just how much rain it drops over the event of the storm. So the peak, the tallest peak there is the 12th of July, but the intensity of it. So these numbers are slightly different from the ones I gave you because they were averaged over the Hammersmith and Fulham catchment. But essentially, the storm on the 12th of July was bigger than anything we had seen since the millennium. and probably bigger from records going back. We haven't had the benefit of weather radar to be able to provide that like-for-like example. And in the red box, I show a little red dot there. That was the 2007 storm that led to the Counters Creek programme. So this rainstorm was more intense and dropped more rain over the day than that storm that led to that programme. So, you know, just to put that in your minds, that this was an extremely heavy storm and well beyond anything we could cope with. Oh, there we are. Thank you very much. Thank you, whoever pressed that. So yes, that red dot shows the intensity of the 2007 storm. Next slide, please. Now, unfortunately, climate change is likely to make this kind of event more frequent in the future. So this is an excerpt from a report published by the Met Office to go to the COP26 conference of parties in Glasgow. And essentially, it says, for the UK, 5 of the 10 wettest years on record have happened since 2000. And the kind of flooding in London in July 2021 is illustrative of the type of event we will increasingly expect to see in the future. So this is unfortunately the new kind of normal we need to design to. And I'll direct your attention to the right-hand side of those boxes. And essentially what they show is that a kind of storm had a frequency of only once in a couple of decades before 2000 is like to double in frequency by the 2030s and maybe 2.5 times more frequently by the 2070s. So this presents the kind of challenge that we need to manage. And what I want to try and assure to you is that we are committed to meeting that challenge, but the solution to that challenge is not digging ever bigger and deeper sewers. So I'd now like to talk about what are we doing to manage that future risk. So, you know, we've been looking into why was this flooding? Was there something about our systems that may have intensified the flooding, some failure of a pumping station, some lack of cleaning of sewers or whatever it is? We have not found anything that we think significantly would have affected that. However, as I said, we want you to have confidence in that finding, and therefore we have commissioned an independent review to look into this. So we've given them our models, we've given them our data, we've given them everything that the boroughs have provided, and they have been receiving information from customers such as yourselves. Okay, so they are taking all that information, they're amassing it, they are undertaking a forensic level analysis of what happened to get to their own understanding of what happened. That work is ongoing now. It is slow, it is methodical, and it is going to take some time. We have asked them to do it as quickly as possible, but balancing the need to have confidence in the results with speed. So we hope that they will be able to publish their findings publicly, the final report probably due about April, May time. However, they will be producing interim reports as they go. But as an independent study, we have no say over what they do, when they do it by. We need to be as hands-off as we can, other than providing the data and being a receptive stakeholder, because we will probably be implementing a lot of their recommendations. We are also going to undertake a major program of protecting properties at higher risk of flooding from sewer flooding. And my next slide will talk a little bit more detail about that. We've been working closely with Hammersmith and Fulham to identify if there are any short-term measures that we can undertake to measure that, because we understand that some of these solutions are going to take years, if not decades, to fully deliver, and we do not want to leave customers at unacceptable risk. So we are looking at what are the short-term measures we can do, but I have to remind you that we are not the lead local flood authority for surface water management. That lies with the local authority, but we need to work very closely with them to ensure that we are supporting them in the identification of solutions and the delivery of them. So simply because the rain can find its way to a drain does not mean that we are ultimately liable for taking it away. And unfortunately, as the public realm has become more and more concreted and climate change is driving these more intense storms, that means that more and more rain is trying to find its way into the capacity of our sewers. So we've got to look at what are the short-term solutions we can do to try and ease that problem, whilst we're also working in parallel to understand the longer-term, more strategic solutions. One of the other things I'd be keen to talk about with you is the concept of community flood plans. So we are going to launch a program of what we call in community flood plans, where we'll work with a charity called the National Flood Forum to basically provide a champion for you, the community, to help you identify the simple measures you can take and also the measures you would like us to take. So it is a process that empowers you to understand the risk you are at, to identify the local measures that will work for you at a property and community level, but also to have a more formal relationship with us when you engage with us about our plans. So in the medium, that sort of sets out the sort of this year's program. I'm then going to talk a little bit about sort of more medium term leading up to 2025. So we will continue to work to develop and potentially even deliver some of those quick projects. We've also been liaising with the Greater London Authority and various other London councils about creating a strategic surface water management plan for London. We need to understand how water is moving between boroughs through our sewers, but also overland flows, because there's no point us trying to find a solution for you if the source of the water is actually coming from outside the borough. So we need to have that strategic perspective. And we've committed time and money to set up that plan and to drive it through, but it needs the collaboration of all partners to do that. And we want to make sure that customers are aware and able to have their input. We're also developing our long-term business plan. So in 2024, we will submit our final plan to Ofwat, which will set out the amount of money we can raise from customers through bills and from our shareholders to pay for the first 5 years of a long-term plan. And it is important that the independent review informs what happens in that plan, because it will tell us perhaps the higher standard of protection that we need to be building to, critical points of investment, but also set out the dramatic economic impact that these floods have and why we need to be changing the way we do for this. I mean, for me, this flood is a clarion moment where we need to say, thank you, Bazalgette, for what you did, but the system of the future is going to need to look differently to what we have and to start to plan and deliver that now. Now moving on to the sewer flooding resilience programme. So our aim is to try and manage flood risk to those properties and communities that we think are at highest risk of sewer flooding. So sewer flooding is when our sewers back up through the sewer connection into your properties, so coming out through a shower tray or a sink or a toilet or whatever. That is something we are directly responsible for, even though we may not be responsible for all the water trying to get into that sewer. So we are committing a £10 million programme to try and identify where are those properties, to survey those properties to understand what is the appropriate measure we can install to manage it, and to install those. Okay, so we have mapped all the properties that we think were flooded in July 21. We're going to outreach to communities to make sure that we haven't missed any and to capture that information. And we will then survey those properties in a rolling programme of surveying, assessing and installing. Okay, but we first need to undertake a pilot to make sure that the process works, because I don't want to commit £10 million to something that isn't going to deliver real and meaningful benefits. So we are going to undertake a pilot, test our approach, and then commit to rolling that out zone by zone by zone. Okay, final slide. Warren, I think I'll hand back to you for that one.
Alex, thank you very much. I fully appreciate we've talked quite a lot of information and shared quite a lot of details. It's all available. So look, what I didn't want to do was that we spend whole time talking, you didn't get the opportunity to raise questions and things we could answer. So I realise we've gone through that quite quickly, but hopefully it's giving you a sense of the depth of the investigation we've done. Hopefully, at least it's not ideal that we didn't respond in the right way when it happened, but I hope you feel I've been honest about what happened and what we've been doing about that. The independent panel that we've set up is incredibly important. And genuinely, other than identifying the chair who's set up everything from there, there's no one from Thames Water who's directly involved in the decision making. All of the information will be published fully publicly, so that we won't filter it. It'll be fully public on that basis, which is the reason we've done that. And that's incredibly important, because I know your elected members will want to see that and understand that, not just via the filter of Thames Water. We know you'll want to see that. And quite frankly, we want to make sure that we're bringing together all of the expertise we can to help us to collectively solve that. So that independent panel is really important in terms to help us set out. Not least of the fact, and it's the last point, we know that a considerable amount of money is going to need to be spent in London. And actually in the Thames Valley as well, right across the Thames Water region. In order for us to get agreement to spend that money, we go through a 5-year process with Ofwat, the regulator, and we have to evidence in where that money is going to be spent and why they're the right things to be spent on, because the vast majority of that money comes from customers. That's where the majority of the money comes from. So we have to evidence to Ofwat that we're spending that money on the right things, and it is the things that customers care about and they want us to spend the money on. So things like the independent panel and the evidence around that and your voice in that is incredibly important. And it's one of my responsibilities to make sure that we capture that as a business, so that we not only take the steps that Alex has outlined now, but we take the steps for the long term as well. So that we're very happy and do our best to try and answer any questions and to kind of take broader discussion points. And of course, happy to share any of the information that Alex and I have talked about tonight. Leader.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I have a number of questions, some of which are pre-prepared and come from residents, but I will call the people in the room to ask their questions first. Brendan and I, and along with our officials, have met with Thames Water on a number of occasions before we got to this point. I've lost count of how many meetings we've had. I think it must be 7 or 8. One of the questions I put, and I think you might want to clear this up, is I remember having negotiated against Thames Water in many previous occasions that under previous owners were taking quite a lot of profit from Thames Water. I remember when I was negotiating against Thames Water for cutting water pressure, the figure was something like £437 million had gone to their owner at the time. I mentioned that to you recently. You have an answer on that. So before we go any further, do you want to just clarify if is there going to be any point Thames Water is going to be putting profit before investment in solving these problems? Do you want to just clarify that for us, please?
So, as I said, I've only been at Thames Water.
I was going to ask Alex.
Oh, okay. Maybe it's probably one for me because I'm a member of the executive team.
Right. Okay.
And it feels appropriate because I'm ultimately one of those responsible. So if you don't mind, Leader, is that okay? Certainly happy to add Alex to add. But I think it's the sort of, to be honest, I think it's the sort of question where, when you're a senior leader in a business, you should answer it rather than leave your team to
because I spoke to everybody.
Sorry.
Go on, carry on.
Sorry. So a little bit of history. So Thames Water, obviously, like all water companies, was privatised 30 years ago. We've had a number of owners since then. Our current ownership makeup started just over 4 years ago. So before that, we were primarily owned by a business called Macquarie. Before that, by a business called RWE. We're now owned by a range of different shareholders. And what I can say is, since that group of shareholders bought the business, and there's been some changes in the shareholders, but broadly bought the business 4.5 years ago, none of them have received a dividend. So none of them received a dividend, a profit. They've not received anything back from that investment. Now, to be perfectly frank, ultimately they will expect a return, but I can assure you, and I regularly meet with the shareholders, that's not the pressure point at the end. And just to give you an idea of the kind of shareholders we have, so I used to work for BT. Some of you may have worked for BT. The BT Pension Fund is a shareholder. The Canadian Government Pension Fund is a shareholder. So generally, most of our shareholders are actually pension funds who are representing people like us, to be honest, and have chosen to invest. And the reason they invest in somebody like Thames Water or any of the utilities, they're looking for a long-term return. And what I can say is they've absolutely emphasised that point. But I can say they have received no return for over 4 years. I can't really comment around owners before that.
I can.
Yes, but of course, you're much freer too than I am, Leader.
Yes, no, well, I won't. Okay. I just wanted to have that clear. So in terms of investment, you talk about putting prices up for residents. Are you also saying that the priority will be to stop these floods going forward, given everything you've said and that will be an investment priority for Thames Water? Appreciate you've got an independent review,
yes,
but this will certainly, is that a commitment you're making?
Yes, and actually, if you look at the 10 million that Alex has already talked about, that's money we've had to prioritise from other things. I mean, clearly we have a range of different things we've committed to fund during this 5-year period. We're just coming to the end of year 2 of that 5 year, and that's the way the whole of the water company, not just us, works. But yes, so we're absolutely committed. Now, Ofwat in the end reviews our overall plan, but I think Alex was clear that actually there are things we want to do now, things we want to do through to 2025 and beyond. And much like good example is Tideway, so the new super sewer in London. You know, this is the scale of the kind of investments we need to be making in the future.
Okay, so on that note, I will move to questions in the room. There was a lady at the back who had her hand up temporarily. Did you still want to? So I think what we will do is we'll take 3 questions at a time. There'll be someone Jane will be handing a microphone around so people at home can hear the question. That's how it will be heard. And I would just say, let's just get through this. I'm keen that everyone gets a chance to ask a question. And I'm also keen that no one talks over each other and we get through this very effectively. So on that basis, I'll take 3 questions now. Is 3 enough or should I go more? 3 or 5? What do you think? 5. Who said that? Right, 5 it is. Okay, starting at the back.
I just wondered, is this working? Do you want me to hold it? Whether you were talking specifically about putting non-return valves in properties, and was that what the 10 million was about? And is that sort of something that you would be going through? I mean, is that budget kind of assigned for that?
Next, please. Sorry, this may as well do over here, given that Jane's going to walk down the camera.
Question for the council. So there are second order effects all of us experienced, including insurance for our properties. In our particular case, insurance went up by 206.7%. So apart from dealing from devastating consequences of the flooding, like properties damage, furniture damage, etc., we also were faced instantly with, and just imagine milk or bread goes up by 200%. That would be public outcry. Yet we felt that we were completely not heard, not by insurance company, not by insurance brokers, etc. And we had to absorb the 206% increase in insurance. Now, next year, when we started conversations with insurance company, what they would like to see in order for insurance premiums to get to a normal level, we're hearing they would like to see the evidence that the sources of flood were addressed. And I understand the 10 million program, but it will take years to get this implemented. What will council do in the near term to help also on the insurance front, which is just exacerbating the overall damage we all experienced?
I've just got real concerns here.
Okay, let's say a question behind, gentleman behind, and we'll work our way backwards again. So there's gentleman here, and then we'll come back to you, madam.
Hello, Thomas Isser here. I represent my sister and brother-in-law who are in Hammersmith Grove. They have 5 children. Their cellar was under 1.5 feet of raw sewage. And what we've heard from Thames Water is it's not our problem because it's surface water that's the responsibility of the council. Now, civil engineer's been down there and he said, well, no, this is sewage and sewage comes from the sewers. It doesn't come from the clouds. So we've got that issue. And what I'd like to ask is this. Back in 2015, there was the project of Counters Creek. Now, there, the council said that they'd persuaded Thames Water not to invest £300 million in improving the sewage system. Thames Water announced in the press, and this is in 2015, that they were going to install flip systems which pump the sewage away from the properties that are at risk. Now, Hammersmith Grove has a slight incline, and my dear sister and my brother-in-law are at the lower end of that. Their next door neighbour, who they get on very well with, has a flip system, bone dry cellar. They, and it's an end of terrace property, didn't. They had 1.5 feet of raw sewage. Now, Thames Water are saying in writing, and I've got the correspondence, I'm going to bore everyone with that, but I think the other aspects are relevant. Thames Water are saying, oh, the flip system, and this is incidentally what your colleagues at Kensington and Chelsea also said, which I attended that meeting, the flip system's a waste of money. It just, and I quote, kicks the can down the road. Now, if that isn't an admission of guilt, I don't know what is, because kicking the can down the road means, and you're the water experts, the sewage goes to the path of least resistance, namely those properties that don't have a flip pumping system installed. Nevertheless, Thames Water is refusing to install a flip system. Now, your colleagues at Kensington and Chelsea announced that these things cost £130,000, which sort of made the room fall into silence. I didn't believe that, so I contacted Young Pumps, who are the company who supplied Thames Water, and they told me it's between £8,000 and £12,000 per property. So there was a lot of fluff being said then. I hope that's going to be corrected on the record. And the other point is, since you're not doing the what's it called, Counters Creek, saving yourself 300 million, if you're saying £10,000 per property, there were 900 properties affected, 980. That's a £10 million investment. I presume that's what you're alluding to. So what's stopping you guys installing it at all the properties who were flooded? And why are you telling the residents who are not insured, and my sister is one of them, they had a building insurance, but they were refused contents insurance on the basis of high risk? Okay, why is Thames Water announcing to these people, not our problem, go and tell the council? That's my question.
We'll call you after we've taken the 5 questions. I will call you straight next. Just take the next round of questions. Right. So first question, non-return valves. Now, there's a huge amount of information about non-return valves. It's not necessarily going to stop the flooding. It's flips that will stop the flooding, but there are issues with that. Do you want to talk about the non-return valve system that you have and the investment and what you're doing?
Thank you. Yeah, just for future questions, it'd be great, Thomas, thank you for giving your name. It just makes it much easier for us to say, Thomas, maybe to say, rather than question a number 3, if people could just say their names, that'd be really helpful for us. So. Yes, brilliant. So, so the lady who asked the first question, are we talking about installing NRVs as part of this, what I call the sewer flooding resilience program? Yes, we're looking at a range of measures. It could be an NRV, it could be a flip, or it could be some kind of sewer protection between the trunk sewer, which is the big sewer that goes down a main road, and the street sewer that flows down your street. We need to look at what is the configuration of the sewer, what is the depth of the basements of the property, what's the type of connection, what's the angle of connection, where does it flow to?
Sorry, can you maybe just explain what an NRV is and what
Sorry,
a flip is? That's okay. He's an expert, but I can ask these questions.
Thank you. I need to be grounded every now and then. So, so an NRV is a non-return valve. What it is essentially is a valve that goes in your sewer connection that allows the sewage to flow from your house into the sewer. But when the sewer is high and it tries to push back, the valve shuts. Okay, so that it's called a non-return valve because it is only a one-way valve.
Just on that, just how sophisticated is it? I mean, most people don't realize what it is. It sounds very sophisticated.
Very, very simple. It's basically a high strength rubber flange that closes, looks a bit like a duckbill within the pipe. So when the pressure is high from the property into the sewer, it opens. And when the pressure from the sewer is high going towards the property, it shuts it. It's very low tech.
What are they made out of? I know Bazaljet put them in originally,
Well,
and then there's been recent ones put in with plastic and all sorts of different things.
So
What do they look like?
when Bazaljet made them, they were made out of obviously just a metal flap, literally a metal flap dangling over your sewer connection. The modern ones tend to be a very high tensile rubber flange that just pushes open and it sits within a sort of a tube. But there are many different brands of it. So this is just one on the market, but this is what they typically look like. A flip is essentially.
Before we get on to that, just on this gentleman's point, do you have knowledge of which properties have non-return valves? Because a lot of them just fall off. Do you have knowledge of that, or this gentleman's suggesting CCTV? Or do you not have knowledge of that?
We have patchy knowledge on it because we as we survey sewers, we do as we clean them, we quite often CCTV them. We do keep some records, but these things, sewers are designed not to need cleaning. They only need cleaning when people flush fat and sanitary towels and other things down their shopping baskets and things we find in them. That's what causes the sewer to block, and therefore that's when they need cleaning. So we have a cleaning rotor that identifies that by risk and tries to do it. So coming back to a flip is essentially something that breaks the gravity connection between your property and the sewer. So normally your wastewater from your roof in the combined sewer combined with your foul water from your sinks and your toilets flows into the sewer for your sewer connection under gravity. What a flip does is it creates a reverse U-bend in that connection and puts a pump there. So the only way the sewer can't back up into the property, but the only way your wastewater can go into the sewer is to be pumped up and over this U-bend. So it's the reverse of a U-bend in your sink, but with a bit of energy behind it. Okay, so that is the alternative, and that provides a slightly higher standard of protection than a non-return valve. And then the other option is as I was articulating earlier, is where we've got a major sewer going down a road that connects to a lateral sewer in the street, is to put some kind of flap on that to stop that major sewer backing up into the small street sewer. And what we will do is we will survey all the sewers in the streets where we understand that properties were flooded. We will survey the connection between the property and the sewer, and where necessary, we'll then look at the connections within the property. Because what we're sometimes finding is people are installing an NRV, a non-return valve, but it's installed in the wrong place. So and therefore it doesn't fully protect the property.
So we do know that non-return valves aren't that effective. They fall off, and in heavy storms, they can actually, you still get brown water pumped into the property.
I would disagree. I think NRVs are fairly effective. When NRVs are not effective is if you've got a big block of flats, for example, with a large roof area and one or two sewer connections, is the amount of water coming off that roof can sometimes, if it can't discharge into the sewer, back up and flood the property. So that's where I'm saying we need to take a risk-based approach to determining what we install. The properties at highest risk will get a flip. Those at lower risk may get another kind of device.
Right.
We don't know until we go and survey the sewer, and we don't know until we understand what the connection is between the property and the sewer.
Okay, let's stick on this. I'm going to come to all the questions that have been asked, but let's just stick on the flip and the non-return valve issue, because it is an important issue, and I think people will have questions on it. I've got a gentleman here. Did you want to come in on this issue?
Yes, I think that's.
Just let pass you a mic.
I was going to mention, which is that if you have very high runoff water upstream of the valve, you're still going to get flooding potentially with an NRV, right? I suppose the question, is how much water?
Yeah. Well, that's yes. Do you want to? Yeah, that's exactly right. So the flips are, effective to a degree because they stop. Essentially, what happens? I don't think anyone set this out. The sewers Bazaljet designed take both rainwater and sewage, And in other cities, they are separate sewer systems. But so when there is a flood, it puts so much rainwater into the pipe, which is 1.8 meters wide down the center of most roads, that as it goes up, it pushes the brown water, the sewage, back into your home. Now the non-return valve is meant to stop that happening. Quite a lot of them fallen off, and quite a lot of them are very old. And so there's a lack of knowledge about who's got which ones. But they're meant to stop that happening, but they don't always. Although this gentleman's Alex is very confident about that. But if you are in a high-risk area, and we've had floods in 2007, we've had floods last year, where there is going to be regular flooding as climate change goes forward, then what you need is a flip. And the problem with flips is if you have one and your neighbors don't, they get the flooding. So you need to put flips in every part of an area likely to be flooded. And that's I'm sorry if you're just cutting in, that's sort of what we've understood the issue to be over the many meetings we've been having. Therefore, if you're going to do an investment program to stop these people's homes being flooded again, what will it do on which is this lady's original question, what can they expect in terms of either flips or non-return valves? If they think they want to flip and you've given them a non-return valve, what do they do to interrogate that to make sure they're having the right solutions to protect them, rather than, how does that work?
Okay, so as I said, we need to undertake a pilot first to check that the process is working. My expectation is that we will provide a survey report to the customer to be able to say, this is your sewer connection, these are your manholes, this is how we have assessed your risk, this is what we intend to install on your property. If you are unhappy with that, then we're going to have to work through a process of how to manage that. But if people want to upgrade for whatever beyond what we can provide, entirely down to them. And sorry, and I was just going with the point of that Thomas made about kicking the can down the road about flips. I think what my colleague was meaning was that flips don't create any additional volume in the sewer, nor do they try and take it out of what's trying to get into the sewer, absorbing it like a green space would. So they don't provide any net increase in the capacity of a sewer.
They just,
We would not install a flip if we felt that it was going to simply transfer the risk from one property to another. And that is going to have to be a key part of the surveying, the sewer and the property connection.
Hold on, let's just, there's a lot of people want to come in on this. I will come back to you, but this lady here wants to say something. Oh, is it on flips and non-return valves, yeah?
Well, yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, I was flooded out of my property. We're still in rental. Still bomb site, and added to which that as we're still in rental, we're now paying Thames Water twice, because we're paying our Thames Water bill at home and in our rental property. So building up funds for your future. So you're saying if you feel it will, a flip valve would create a risk for next door property, you can't have one.
No, I think what they're saying is, and I don't want to speak for them. I think what they're saying is they will look at an area, and if they decide that area is of risk of flips, they will put flips into all the properties. What I'm asking is, how do we know? How do we have an objective view on that? And how do you, as residents, feel safe that they've made the right decision? And because it would, that's sort of where I'm asking. Anything else on flips? Well, let 8 months
after this flood, and I can understand why you did. Facing this summer, how are all these issues going to be solved? Because it's not a timeline of 5 years, it's not 10 years. It's coming up before long.
Okay, that's a very good point. I'm going to come back to that about what we're doing now, because it is coming on, and I'm always a little dubious when someone says, especially in these times, we're going to have an independent review. But they are doing an independent review, and that's what they're saying. Anybody on the flips before we go? Before I just on the, this is a very important issue. Flips, non-return valves. These are things that can improve things. Anyone want to know about that? Sorry, I promised this lady. It's on the flips. Yes.
Yeah. A terrace of Victorian houses. And
yes.
We were in fact the only one to be flooded.
Right.
As far as I know, in the street. And I was told that these Victorian terraces were designed with sewers which coalesced into one specific property. And so we are the one that is disadvantaged by having the flooding. Now, as you say, you're going to assess areas and only put in a flip or a non-return valve in areas that have been extensively flooded. Presumably my street isn't going to be hit by that because I was the only one.
Well, maybe all your neighbours have flips. Is that true? Is what this lady said about the way the sewer works?
So what we've done is we've mapped all the properties that have been reported as flooded to us. We've collated those into zones. I don't know where your address is or so on, but the intention is not to miss anyone out. Okay, so the focus for delivery efficiency will be in zones, but if you're not in one of those zones, we will make sure that your property is surveyed and we consider what the option is.
And would you have a note of me, presumably having been called to this meeting, either the council or Thames Water know that I was flooded? Do I need to fill in one of these forms?
If you haven't filled one in, yes, please.
It would be useful backup.
It's
There's been data. I should clarify. There's been data protection issues.
Exactly. We
So
can't.
we can gather information. We're not under
So
the law allowed to give it to these people. So we've been finding all sorts of ways around. So we're acting legally. But it would be good if you just filled any information in again as a backup.
While I've got the microphone, can I just make one more point? Is that having claimed through contents insurance, nothing to do with building insurance, when I then had to update my building insurance, that had inflated 3 or 4 times. And I've now apparently been noted, because all insurance companies talk between themselves, I am categorized as somebody who is likely to claim.
Right.
And therefore, any insurance that I get, apparently Admiral Insurance told me that over the next 25 years, I have a black spot against my name as somebody who is likely to claim, and therefore my premium has gone up.
Yeah.
Which I think it's just staggering. And what's the point of insurance?
Yes, absolutely. I will come back to that because we may need to do something separately on insurance, I think, based on what that lady said at the back. Right. I just want to get to the crux. Okay.
I also live on Hammersmith Grove, and my next door neighbour, who's owns the whole property, they're millionaires. Thames Water fitted a flip for them about 5 years ago. I'm a council tenant. I'm a single mother and a nurse, and I live with my daughter in a basement flat. When they fitted the flip for my neighbours, they didn't assess my property. I was the only person that got completely flooded with raw sewage. I didn't get any help. I had no contents insurance. I lost my home up until very recently. I've been left completely broke, unwell. I had to leave my job as a nurse. And I don't believe that. I think that the flips do impact on the neighbours. And I think all the water was pushed into our property. We were the only property that got so badly flooded.
Yes, no, well, that's absolutely right. If all your neighbours have flips and you don't, then you get flooded. And that's why we're saying to Thames Water, they need to have a comprehensive. I think that is a good point. That is a good point. I will clarify, but I'm just clarifying your point. You're absolutely right what you said, and that is why we need a comprehensive plan, which we can come on to. Now, just on flips and non-return valves, because I think this is a crux of a matter issue. I just want to take a few more questions. There's a gentleman here who's patiently had his hand up. I'll come to you.
It's just to clarify a point. Is a flip and a non-return valve, is that part of a sustainable underground drainage system called SUDS? Because that's what was put in a road one above us, and they had no flooding, whereas our road, Westville Road, was severely flooded.
Yes, I can answer that.
Greenside Road, no trouble.
So I will call on Bram to answer that, who's the Hammersmith and Fulham's head of highways. But what SUDs are is they try and make the pavement and the road porous. So when it rains, it just sinks into the ground. And so there's schemes, which you saw, I think, on one of the videos of a small scheme. They're going in all over the borough, but they're not, it wouldn't necessarily increase the water in your street, because what it does is just absorbs the water where it falls instead of sending it into the drains and down away. But Bram, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the SUDs, just to clarify that. We can come on to SUD schemes in a minute because we are rolling them out everywhere.
Thank you very much for that, Leader. I think you answered the question really well anyway from your brief description, so well done. Yes, the SUD schemes, as the Leader says, they're totally different from what a flip or a non-return valve is. You're basically trying to slow down the water entering the system or stop it or collect it somewhere.
Into the ground.
So effectively what you're trying to do is, if there's two parts to the equation. The first is the system, which Thames Water manage. Then you've got the roads and the parks and the roofs and various other things above it. And what SUD schemes, what trying to do in a simple way, in analogy, is it's actually to stop the water or slow it down or store it temporarily somewhere else. That's what it's trying to do.
They keep the water in the groundwater, and we should. But one of the solutions for London is to make all of it as porous as possible, so the water goes into the ground rather than flooding into the sewers. So, and the microphone should be coming your way in a second.
In the interest of time, so on the back of the flood, I engaged non-return valves, and my engagement that I had with them suggested it wasn't their problem and they had no interest in taking any action. So based on what you've said today, should I expect some engagement with you on this topic?
Okay, I'll come back to that. We will come back to it, because you can imagine I'm dismayed by that. Anyone else on flips or non-return valves before we go on to the other questions and area? I know Malcolm has something insightful to say on flips and return valves, because he's done a lot of research on this. So over to you, Malcolm.
Sorry, Stephen, but never mind. When the flooding happened, I basically communicated with all the people in our street and with local streets in Brackenbury, and we put forward a proposal to Thames Water asking for all of the houses that had been affected to have a flip installed. This was in reaction to letters that individual customers had got from Thames Water, some saying that NRVs won't work when there's a heavy rainfall, which is one of the issues, I think, is if NRVs are installed, can we be confident enough that they will protect the properties in the way that they should be protected, when in fact the gold standard is flips. And yes, people are concerned, of course, that a flip may divert water from one property to another. But frankly, the answer is to install flips in as many, if not all, properties that are likely to be affected, and not push the water, therefore, into a property which is not protected. That would be the solution, in my opinion. And as I say, we put forward a recommendation and a request for something like 150 properties to have these installed in the Brackenbury area and around. So I think there are questions to be asked about how much Thames Water can afford and how soon they can install these things, because clearly, as one of the members of the audience said here, the summer is coming. Who is to guarantee that this year we won't have a similar event?
So just on that point, Malcolm, in our first meeting with Thames Water, had found a similar mechanism to a flip, which was a fraction of the price, a German model. And we were asking, if we could get Thames Water to prioritize investing flips into key areas, could we also offer people a chance to have them fitted themselves and provide them with registered, cheaper variations that might protect their homes? Now that's what Malcolm, Brendan had asked in that meeting. Do you want to talk a little bit about the German flip thing? Because it touches on an earlier question about the price being significantly lower. I think how much were these ones, Malcolm?
About 7,000.
These were 7,000. And what if people want to fit these to their own homes? Can Thames Water supply those to people, and as part of a much wider scheme? Where are you on that?
So my understanding, and responding also to Thomas's point, is that the price quoted for you is simply for the pump system in itself. The main cost of installing a flip is actually digging a large chamber. If we, can we show the slides again?
No, let's not.
Okay, sorry. Well, on one of the slides was a picture of a flip. It requires a large chamber. There we go. So that picture in the bottom right there, essentially we don't want to put our contractors working in small sewers at risk. And therefore, unless they can actually access the sewers safely, we require them to build a chamber to hold the flip in. Okay. Because these flips need to be visited at least twice a year and maintained, we would prefer not to build them on the customer's property, because then we need their permission to access it. And it just makes trying to maintain this fleet of flips an absolute nightmare. So our preference is therefore then to build them either on the street walk or in the road space. That is what magnifies the cost of these above the simple £6,000 to £8,000 of buying the pump themselves. Now, if people want to install them themselves, absolutely, we cannot stop you from doing that. However, if we can't maintain it and access it, we won't commit to take on that maintenance commitment.
But that lady at the back who had to give up a job as a nurse was saying that all the properties around her didn't get flooded, presumably because they had private flips. Hers was flooded, and she's lost a job as a consequence. I mean,
well, I have to say,
is there something? You know, if people are fitting their own versions of flips, do you have any information on people who fitted those, and therefore the risk to other people, such as this lady experienced?
I just want to say on this just quickly. Yeah. One of the things that I did, because as I've been open with you, I'm new to the water industry. I spent a couple of days with our flip team. So in London, we have a permanent team whose job it is to install and maintain flips. And I thought the easiest way, because I had no more knowledge than any of you did, was to go and I spent a whole day with them. So actually, you know, to take the point, the reason it isn't particularly the equipment that doesn't cost. They have to be regularly replaced. They have to be installed. Many of them have had to be put into footwells or basement and all sorts of, all of which has to be dug out. So I visited in that day over 20, a number of which they had to go back to get access because they had been put in. So these are all of the things that we're thinking about. When many of those flips were put in place, a number of people who were residents at that time didn't want to have them in on that basis because it was quite disruptive. Hence, as Alex said, we've been looking at how we can do it outside of people's properties so that we can access them and maintain them in a different way. It's absolutely appalling, your story. I'm really sorry. No, and I understand that. No, and I understand you were there, which is really helpful. So, but what we're committing.
But it was cancelled.
So what Alex is committed to do is we want to, one of the reasons we're asking people to report is that we want to look at everybody who experienced flooding. And then we can make sure we do those individual surveys and find the right solution. I think Alex did say that we would make that kind of available. Now, there is an element of, if we're going to move quickly on this, there's a very good point on that, this is why we're trying to get on with this. Now, I totally recognise the fact, because a number of you have mentioned it, that when you've contacted Thames Water, immediately afterwards, you haven't had a very good response. I thought I was really honest with you that I didn't think our response was acceptable. And therefore, that's why we've prioritised the team. We've moved Alex out of his previous role. We put a team in around this. And I try to use really black and white. So I got across that. I thought it was unacceptable, really did. So that's what we're committing to do now.
Just on that, this lady has people all around her who've got what looks like flips.
Yes.
She hasn't got them. If there's another flood in June, I presume it's the same for you. If there's another flood in June, then people are going to be back to square one, and people are having their houses refitted, repainted, all the expense they're going to, but their insurance has gone up by 206.7%. So what's the solution to that lady at the back if all her neighbours have had flips? There could be another flood. And they want some action in the short term to protect them from going through this nightmare again. That's what I think we're trying to get to,
We understand, Leader. So we are committing to do this. Alex has talked about the plan. I'm not going to sit here and just go, I promise it will be done by June, because you wouldn't believe me if I said it. So I'm not going to say that. Yes, if you could please, if you've not reported it already, if you can please fill out a form. And that's because we have to have your permission to use your data. There are forms on the side, or you can do it on the website.
Yeah. But I would also suggest that you give my constituents, if you give your name and details to Jane, then I will email you and we'll take the case up. To Jane here. Okay, right. We need to keep some pace. There's a lot of people who have questions. I got this gentleman and that gentleman, then I'm going to need to move. if it's on this, bend back to that gentleman. I'm going to get the panel then to answer the other questions that have been raised, and then I'm going to go to what's on the people who've got questions online. Okay, right. So there he is.
Hi, thank you. I just really want to know when, and I want a date. I want to know when, if we call you out to come and survey our properties or we request it, when is it going to be done by? And I think you should give everybody in this room a time when it will be done by. Time is of the essence. This cycle will restart probably end of June in terms of the type of weather we have now. People need to know. Also, I want to know what's happening with, you know, you have very limited knowledge of what's actually in the sewers, etc., and flips, etc. When is that going to happen? I'd just like some, you know, all I've heard is aspirations rather than actual actions. You know, give us an action plan. When is it going to happen by?
There you go. So appreciate you. Please don't say independent review. When?
No.
When are you going to? When are we going to have the action plan? So no one has to go for this by the next summer weather storms.
As I said, at the moment we are in the process of. We've got a pilot area in Norland Square. We've sent contractors out to survey those. We need to do a few more properties to understand the sort of information we require. We are then going to build that rolling program. We're already procuring contractors, but what I can't say to anyone in this room is 31st of May, the contractor will be there. What we will do is we will work sequentially through each of the zones. We will write to the properties that we've got 2 letters we've already prepared. 1 letter that says, thank you for reporting your property is being flooded. We would like to come out and survey your property. Please, can you book a survey on this or the following dates? Because, well, that's a good starting point. We're also going to be talking to residents associations. We're also going to be liaising with councillors so we can have public meetings to capture those people who are not present in their properties at the moment. Appreciate that a lot of you are out of your properties having restoration work, to fix what happened. But as a starting point, we write to those. We're going to use property searches to try and find landlords where there are tenants, where there is no one to receive that letter. I am hoping, if you have a builder in there, that they will see an official letter from Thames Water and let you know. If people have other ideas of how we can contact it, other than through public meetings and setting up some formal channels in your area to contact you, I'm very eager to hear. Sorry? Well, I'm sorry, if you're not in your property and we don't know where you are, how do I contact you? Because we're sending those bills to your address. I'm just saying alternative ways that we have so far devised is through lots of WhatsApp groups, residents associations who've got other forms of communication.
I think
there are other ways to
I think what you're asking
utilize
for is a solution. So we'll take that away. I mean, I'm immediately thinking, because I'm really grateful for that feedback. I'm sitting there thinking I should have thought of that. I didn't. There's no point me saying that otherwise. But I can think of ways that we could create a website where people tell us the different address they're at and we can associate. So let us take that away. You asked, Job, quite reasonably, that's your job. We'll take that away. We'll share it back with the council to what we've come up with, and we'll start working out how we can do that.
Okay, I've got that gentleman and that gentleman, and as you started the whole process, I'll take you last, and then we'll go to some questions online. So 3 questions, sir.
Thomas is again. I'd like to get to the nub of the liability of the sewage flooding, because we've talked about websites and WhatsApps, and it's all terribly jolly, but who's actually going to pay? In my sister's case, she's got about £65,000 worth of damage, 5 kids, all new uniforms, all photos, all the, I don't want to get emotive about it, but, the history of the family has been destroyed through the sewage. And to get sort of shiny suited customer service people saying that the complaint has been closed isn't good enough, simply not good enough. So what about the liability there? And to answer your own question about when is a flip system liable, my sister and brother-in-law were told, you've got to be flooded twice within 3 years to be eligible. Now, would you like to confirm that or deny that?
Okay, just one question. Thank you. Sorry, I was very clear on. So just over to you again.
Hello. Yes, my name's Graham Harris. I live in Bassane Park Road, and most of the basements in our road were flooded on the 12th. And we have in our road going from Rylet Road a pipe which is apparently 30 millimeters diameter. It's a very narrow pipe. That sounds tiny to me. I can't imagine how such a tiny pipe can take away all of that sewage. But right next to our road in Rylet Road, there's a pipe that's 2 to 3 times bigger. Now you said earlier, Alex, something about trunk and street sewers, right? It seems to me that there must be a solution there, which there must be a way to connect those pipes together, either to connect them together to take an overflow situation when you have that kind of flooding, or you just put in a bigger pipe, and it would be for the whole. It would be 30 or 40 houses along that street that would then benefit from it. Surely that is going to be a better solution than putting a flip in everybody's house.
That is a good question, because we've asked that. And then I'll just take the lady at the very back.
To help us deal with irresponsible developers or people who sort of install the pipes at their own devices and the pipes are too small and get overwhelmed with the rain is falling. What we're getting is a runaround. And forgive me for being sort of sarcastic, but we used to regulate the size of bananas, and we don't go and regulate the size of pipes people are installed on the surface of the buildings, down pipes, etc. And I actually think the council can take the position and regulate the building owners, the freeholders, the developers, that the pipes need to be on the particular size, because it's not only the flip and the other systems, but also the pipes which are exacerbated in this particular sort of flooding, exacerbated the effect. So why wouldn't council go and regulate the construction standard?
Okay.
Something which is so fundamental and quintessential. Let's not regulate bananas, let's regulate the size of pipes to prevent the flooding. And also, by the same token, your story is heartbreaking. If somebody is installing the flip side and the property in the middle is not installing the flip side, why shouldn't be at standard? So it's everybody with the flip, with the flaps or whatever the right name is, or people seek permission to install where assessment of the nearby properties needs to be done. It's like very simple things, which doesn't seem to be sort of resonating. And again, I'm not for like regulating the hell out of our lives, but something which can affect our lives should be regulated, like building standard, like installation of these devices where, super wealthy can do it, but then what, should we all be flooded next door? I mean, it just doesn't seem logical.
Okay, thank you. And then the lady at the back.
I was just wondering about why Norland Square was chosen for the pilot, just because I'd understood that they had a whole street system put in 10 or 20 years ago. And what is their pilot? Is it because that previous system didn't work? And what's the pilot now? Is it flips or is it non-return valves?
So how did you return that pilot? What are you doing in the pilot? And what have you?
So the reason we chose Norland Square was simply because we have some good knowledge about it. We've got high confidence in the number of reported properties, and it's a small, neat area that we understand the drainage system well, so we know what will be the impact of what we do. So it's a good proof of concept before we then start to roll out at a bigger scale. It also enables us it takes time to contract and appoint people. It enables us to do the learning whilst in parallel contracting the many contractors we're going to need to undertake this in order to deliver it at the speed that we would like to and you anticipate. So that is simply the reason. There's nothing else than that. It had to start somewhere. It was somewhere where we had highest confidence to start. My intention is to roll the program out where we can have the biggest bang of the buck as quickly as possible. So we will go to zones where we think we can make the most impact the most quickly, and also where we think we've got the highest vulnerability. So where we know we have high concentrations of vulnerable people in self-contained basement flats. That's the principle we're planning to to adopt, but we need to undertake a pilot just to make sure it all works before we start throwing large amounts of money around, which is frankly your bills. We need to know that what we're going to do is going to have the impact, because every pound we spend on protecting someone who isn't at risk is a pound that's not going to someone who is at risk.
Just on that, Alex, there is quite a lot of urgency, and I come back to this lady's question on the front. There is likely to be more flooding in the summer, and they want some type of action. So in terms of how quickly you turn that pilot into actions, I think that's really the consensus of what everyone's, people
totally
do not
hear your
want to go
message,
through
and
this again for the reasons that they've all very clearly said. And I think that's one message that needs to be taken back.
Got it.
Okay, before we go, because I'll come back to the people in the room, but there are a lot of people who've tuned in, and I'm going to take some questions there. I'm just looking. First of all, it's exactly this. So firstly of all, in terms of the planning powers that councils have, if you'll have read in the newspaper, they are limited. So if you put in a planning application for your house or any property that you owned, and it was legal under the national statute, the council has no powers to stop you. Now, it can try and influence that by setting sorry, sir, let me just clarify. I can't get into a debate. I can clarify, I can try and answer your questions to my best of my ability, which is what I'll try and do. So the law, the national statutes on planning are very clear, and councils have 3 stages. The planning goes through 3 stages. The first stage is the council gets to set a local plan and say whether or not such a scheme would be allowed. Even when it does that, we get taken to the planning inspectorate if we get it wrong, and if it's outside of the national legislation, we lose the case, and that's what happens. So what we have is a process where planning permissions are given, particularly on big schemes, very big schemes. They could always get called in to the mayor or indeed to the Secretary of State. So we have to stick within the national legislation, and we take a very tough line on developers. We've stopped a lot of big developments going on, and we've forced a lot of people to cut the size of the development because we just don't think it's right for this area. But even then, we've lost a number of cases when we've gone to appeal. In terms of the lady's point about the pipes, that is laid out by national legislation. And if there is a rogue developer, I wrote to a director today about a case of a rogue developer who was not fitting electrics and plumbing and everything else properly, and we now have a team investigating that rogue developer. But we don't know they're going to do it until they do it and someone reports it, despite the fact that we do send the planning person around. But even when we send the planning person around, the current national legislation is if you are the developer, you might choose to go to a private company to assess whether you're within the law and not go to the council. So therefore we get scant information. But I promise, I can assure you that we take a very, very firm line on property developers. We take a very firm line on what they build, on how they build it. Now, I did raise this question 2 weeks ago when we were last within Thames Water, because there is a number of schemes being built across London. We've got some very big development areas in Hammersmith and Fulham, all applicable to national legislation. And what I said to Alex, and he can give you the answer then, is how could it possibly, does it not make it much worse if we're allowing lots of people with lots of sewage, lots of, water to get rid of? Then how does that deal with an already overstretched sewer system? So I will pass that question. I hope I've answered your question. I will pass that question on to Alex, because there is some about how the sewer works and what about these big developments.
If you don't mind, Ida, this is another of my responsibilities, is to work with developers. I have a range of responsibilities. And much like your frustrations over some of the powers you have, we actually, as a water company, we're not part of a statutory planning process. So, and again, that's not the council's decision. That's a broader decision on that basis. So people don't have to consult or take us into account. Now, we do work with all of the major developers, and my teams in London, for example, work with all of the major developers. And what we essentially do is we review the plan that they're putting in. They have to pay to connect anything they're building into our network, and there are standards they have to do in order to connect in, and they actually then contribute to anything we need to do on a bigger network, what's called network reinforcement, so a bigger investment around on that basis. However, we can't do all of it all of the time, because there are limitations to how much we do, and what we can't do is say no. So if somebody comes up with a huge piece that's got planning permission, I can't say, no, you cannot connect it to our network. I can put standards in that they have to meet, but that doesn't include drains. It effectively includes the water connection or the sewage connection, and I have to adopt it. Okay, so that we can put some elements in like that. But then what we then have to do is work very hard to actually kind of rebuild around the area, and that could be very, very disruptive, obviously.
Just because we've got Andy Slaughter MP here, and he's obviously can raise these issues in Parliament as well, and he's kindly turned up. But Alex gave me a slightly different answer when I asked you a couple of weeks ago. You were saying that you were giving us technical explanation of what actually happens with these developments, because I was asking you about a number of large developments, and you said I'll let you say what you're going to say.
The planning framework in London, so the Mayor of London has a London plan that sets out the spatial development strategy for London. Within it, it has a planning policy that says that new development should have effectively tried to achieve what's called greenfield runoff rates. So where it can, it should withhold and use that water. Where it can't, it should release it to the sewer at a slow rate. And it should incentivize the installation of SUDs, this what's called green infrastructure. So in theory, new development should be reducing the amount of runoff from the previous property, should be getting better. Now, obviously, that is a policy and only has the benefit if it is forcibly applied and it is checked that what was the developer committed to build was actually built, installed, and is maintained. So in theory, new development doesn't necessarily make a situation worse. The other point I made to the leader was actually that when you have a rainstorm, not the sort that we were talking about on the 12th of July, but when you have a reasonably heavy rainstorm, the amount of water that runs off a patio is about equivalent to the same amount of water you would get from a wastewater from 100 properties. Let me explain that one more time. So the amount of rainwater that comes off a patio is the equivalent to the same amount in the same period of time for 100 properties wastewater. Okay, so new development is a problem, but there is a process to manage it. What is also the problem is this incremental covering over of front gardens, patios, extensions, etc., where those are not done permeably. They have as big, or if not more significant impact than the new development. But at least on the new development, there is a lever to control it. How well it is controlled is, unfortunately, as Warren just said, not down to us.
Okay, right. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questioners online, so I'm going to call them in order. Can I apologize? I've been taking a while to ask you. The meeting does go on to 9 o'clock. The meeting does go on to 9 o'clock. I am going to call all 6 people who've got their hands up online. I'm going to call all 6 people online. Sorry, sir. I'm sorry, sir. If you let me finish, please. I'm talking to the audience. I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry. Okay, let me just call everybody else. I have given you a chance to talk. Okay, well, I will do that at the end. And if you could put your mask up as well, please, guys, cover your nose. I would appreciate that. Okay. Susanna Cohen, I think, or Cullen, is that?
Cohen, yes. Hi. Thank you. I just wanted to echo a question that has been asked already, I believe, but I also was phoned by Thames Water, having put in my form and told that I was not going to be eligible for any help. I think we've heard that a couple of times. I would just really like clarity of whether this scheme, when you say you're going to the highest risk properties, is that all of us who were flooded, or are you picking and choosing between us?
Thank you very much. Next up, come on to Ben Hennessy.
Yeah, it wasn't a new question for me. I'm on Welchie Road and I can see a few residents on Welchie Road as well. Our basement was flooded. We haven't even got the work started yet. It's around 50 grand's worth of bills through the insurance side of it. But it was just to echo the point around liability, where that insurance scheme cannot meet things like 7 months worth of water, gas, electricity and council tax, where would you go to as a resident? Where does the liability really sit with this? And I appreciate all the good work and the conversation that's happening to try and both resolve and prevent in the future, but where do we stand in the midst of quite a significant amount of money that no one's reimbursing?
Thank you very much. And I really should have brought my glasses. I think that says Flora. I think that says Flora Guild, does it? Yeah, Flora Guild.
Yes, Flora Dugwood from Hammersmith Grove as well. So there's been a number of residents on Hammersmith Grove. So I bought, it was my first flat a week before the flooding. So moved in and the floods happened about 10 days later, moved out to temporary accommodation, and I'm still in that temporary accommodation waiting for the works to start. I feel that I've done, all I can. Brendan has been hugely supportive as well. I've written to Thames Water, written to Ofwat, investigated the German device, had the fitters to come out, echoed what you said. The actual device is about £5,000, but to fit it was upwards of 35 grand because of the digging that they had to carry out. What I'd like to know is this. You've said about identifying this high risk properties. When I wrote to Thames Water, I was told, this was quite a few months ago now, told that that there hadn't been sufficient number of floods in the last 10 or 15 years, which just isn't acceptable. And that's, having moved in 10 days before the flood, that's not acceptable to be told that, because, a year on, I'm still not back in the property. So what I'd like to know is how you identify these flats, and presumably I'm hoping that, myself and the number of other residents will be included in that list, when this pilot will start. And the pilot, Norland Square being one of the most expensive areas in London, having put all my investment into my first flat, and, being basically having a lot of fear to move back into that flat. Firstly, about the prospect of this happening again, which you've admitted, you've shown the graphs that this will happen again. And also secondly, that, having put all my investment into that and worked hard in my career to do that, then, at some point I'm going to want to sell this flat. And how is that going to affect the costing without something that Thames Water is going to help to support me do that? So I'd really like, my ask is when this pilot is going to begin, and clear dates to do that, and how you're going to identify these high risk properties, having been given the information before that my flat wasn't subject to this because hasn't been flooded a significant number of times, which is not true and is not fair.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very sorry to hear about this and every single case, but thank you very much. And I think that does express, I've got a gentleman who's on screen, but I can't see your name, sir, but you're the only person on screen.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you, Councillor. My name's Cameron and I'm a resident and leaseholder on Overstone Road, so just parallel to Hammersmith Grove. I echo a number of points that Flora has highlighted as well, particularly that I purchased my flats just over 3 years ago before the flood, and then when the flood happened. The nature of the profession I have, I read things very, very carefully and went through a good 300-400 pages of documentation for my conveyancing, and nothing was said that the area was liable to flooding. And these were official documents produced, obviously, from the Environment Agency. I do have two questions. One is a question for the council, and one is a question for Thames Water. The first one is for the council, who, for leaseholders, negotiate the insurance for buildings insurance. I would like to know what the council will be doing in the future to recognise that obviously a number of properties who the insurance has been organised for will probably increase in premiums. What is the council doing to try to reduce that risk? And the second one is really for Thames Water. I wrote to Thames Water many times and was said that, again, similar to Flora, that the property hasn't been flooded enough. I completed the flood form last summer. I didn't hear any response. I've had a response saying, "Oh, we've told us about, yes, it was a event that doesn't happen regularly," and so on. But I've received no further correspondence. I understand the pilot is taking place and that is absolutely fine, but I'm sure a number of residents and homeowners here want to know when we're going to be having these surveys done, and when means my property is currently being renovated right now, so that it's back to pre-flood conditions. But I don't want to find that I arrive back in the end of April and then my birth at the end of May, I then get flooded again. I want to know when we're going to have surveyors out to see to sort of finalize that final piece in the puzzle. Really, thank you. I'm really sorry, I can't hear anything
Sorry,
at
can
home.
you hear, I realised I didn't have my microphone on. I was asking for Christian next, then Chris Hamilton. Are you, either of you there, please?
Yes, thanks for organizing. My property is in Irving Road, and it was flooded in 2021, 2016, 2010, and 2009. So 4 times in the last 10 years. A question: the flip device is they provide a stopgap, but they don't provide a structural solution to the issue. So I have 2 questions. Number 1 is why the Counters Creek project was abandoned, and number 2, is the super sewer going to provide potentially a structural solution to this? Thank you.
And then Chris Hamilton.
Hi, mine's easy. It's been asked quite a few times by a gentleman in the room and multiple people online. We just want to know about liability, and we want to hear a little bit more because every time somebody seems to ask it, it seems to just kind of get swept under the carpet. So if somebody could please help us figure that out, we'd be very much appreciative. Thank you.
Right, we'll move straight on then to some of the questions, some of the answers. If I can, and please tell me I've got this wrong, if I can group into 3 areas: liability, insurance, and again, there's the action. What you see from both Cameron and Flora is what actions are being taken and when are they being taken. Can we go on liability? So you have a lot of people now who don't have the funds to stop this happening to them again, can't get the insurance, but there's a liability. What's the answer to that, please?
Yeah, that's with me, Leader. Thank you very much. And I certainly wasn't trying to avoid answering that question. I just felt it was appropriate to wait at the right moment. So where as a water company, we are liable, either liable directly or through support from our own insurer, is set out effectively as part of our overall license environment. And specifically in this situation, because at the moment our assessment is that none of our assets failed, we don't believe we're liable. And that's a very difficult thing for me to sit here and say when I hear the impact on, but I promised you I'd be open and honest, so I'm being open and honest with you. But at the moment, our assessment is that we're not liable in this situation. That's not the same as saying we're not going to put flips in, we're not going to spend that money on that basis, but we're not liable. It is one of the things we've asked the independent panel to review. It's part of their scope specifically to review this so that we can have their view kind of around this piece. But the reason you will have been told that there's no compensation or that we won't accept any liability is that we don't believe that that applies in this situation.
Just on that, because I mean, to a degree, with the greatest respect, it would be a predictable answer. A large organisation would say we're not liable. Can I just, if people who think you are liable for any negligent reason, okay, if they think that and they want to feed into this independent panel, okay, because they may not have the legal resources to take you to court, then how do they feed into that independent panel about liability?
So the independent panel is set up. We can give the details, set up a way of public giving information. And it's one of the things they've consciously asked out. We've really tried to make it as independent as possible. So we're not involved, we're not structuring the information, we're not filtering the information, but we absolutely can give the information across about how to contact the panel and how members of the public could contact, and they've actually reached out for information, but that's not via Thames Water. That's a very conscious decision because otherwise we start to muddy the water about whether you feel it's independent or not. If I can just build quickly. So to give you an example of something that I've been dealing with. So I mentioned earlier that Unfortunately, one of our pipes, in fact, a series of pipes burst before Christmas in North London. And in that situation, that impacted really, unfortunately, a number of residents and customers in that situation. And because our pipe had burst and affected their property, as it happens to be with clean water, but with clean water in that situation, the way our license works is we have a specific set of liability and a relationship with our insurer to cover that kind of situation. And that is how this is set out. Because in this situation, the network has worked as it is designed and set up. And I'm accepting the point that actually there are whole questions over the fact that is it sufficient, etc. And that's why we're having the independent panel we've set up, so we know that. But in that situation, none of our assets have failed. So we've spent a lot of time, obviously, going through this, checking this, making sure that we understand how this works. But that's, and I totally understand that you won't like my answer. I totally appreciate that. But I said to you I would be open and honest.
Okay, all right. So, so liability is left unclear. I think. Yeah. Bram, do you want to talk about the council's legal liabilities to stop flooding, which it does have a liability on that? But...
Thank you very much, Leader. Yes, well, it's similar to what Thames Water. So there has to be, with liability, there has to be negligence proved. So if there's any negligence that's proved against the highway authority or the council, then they're normally assessed by our insurance department, and then they'll be processed through that process. And if it's proven, then the council will pay. Yeah. So, but. Okay.
Yeah, but I don't think you're talking about sewers. I think you're talking about the, but sewers are nothing to do with the council. You're talking about the road structure, including the grates that the water can run through. Could you answer that?
Yeah, thank you very much. So if you can give us the details of exactly what you're claiming, and we will assess that claim and give you an early indication as whether they're what we will give you a response. And based on that, you can then decide whether you want to take it further or not. So.
Right. Okay. In terms of that point, just on block grates, you know, what's the council's program on blocked grates? How do you make sure grates are getting blocked? How long are they blocked for if they get blocked? Yep. How does that work?
So we have a routine inspection of all the road gullies, effectively what the leader is referring to. And they can be blocked, and they might not seem blocked at the present moment, so they're called non-runners. There might be further problems further down into the pipe, and we will continuously have a program of repairing those as and when we identify them. So,
and how is that? Just to follow on from this lady's question, how is that measured? So how would a resident know whether Hammersmith and Fulham's gullies and grates are in a better state than ever anywhere else? Say, for example, in London. Is there a benchmark you can see on that?
I'm not aware of a benchmark as such, but what we do is actually make sure that we do survey all these gullies, and there will be non-runners, etc., as part of the process, because they have problems further down in terms of the connection. But the point I would make is that, in a way, the flooding happened as a result of an extreme event, and it happens as a result of surcharging in the system. Now, the more water that goes into the system is actually going to cause more surcharging. So you're
saying it's blocked. It stays on the surface.
It stays on the surface rather than go into the property.
Interesting point. Just on that, if given that there's a sort of street cleaning system that has a duty to clean the gullies, and you're regularly surveying them. If residents think their gully is blocked and is causing flooding in that area, then what do they do?
Yeah, if they can report them through the council's contact, or email them to us, we're quite happy to investigate and repair where, so it's not an issue. So,
okay. Any more questions on that? In which case, carry on with the other issue. Key thing. I can't recall who said it. So one is liability, the one is insurance. Okay, and it strikes me that Cameron best articulated it, I think, and the lady who's since left also mentioned it. if you now live in an area, and I've been dealing with floods with my constituents for a long time, and Hammersmith Grove has been particularly badly flooded on several occasions. If you are living in an area which your insurance companies have now got down as likely to be flooded again, which means you have 206.7% increase in your insurance ratio. What can we do as a local authority and with Thames Water to put an action plan in to change that insurance rating? Have you got anything?
Thank you very much, Leader. So obviously the insurance companies are using multiple factors to determine what the premiums will be now and what the premiums will be in the future. And it's a bit like, it's a similar sort of thing when people take car insurance out, etc. So what we need to do is to try and give confidence to the insurance companies that future liabilities in relation to this are going to reduce or improving and reduce. And we can work closely with Thames Water to make sure that we're putting in the mitigation measures in to stop it happening. So in my view, the key issue you've got here is that you've got flooding. And if you imagine the flooding, it could be equivalent to filling up Wembley Stadium. So what you need to do is accept that flooding is going to happen. It's about designing the flooding to make sure it happens away from residents and businesses. And that's the key.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, just to push on that. So I know, for example, Cameron said he lives in Overstone Road. We had extensive tree planting put into Overstone Road about 2-3 years ago. 3 years ago, we planed back some of the road and put sud schemes in. And it's one of the most sud schemes in any road, and yet it was still badly flooded. So can we do anything else from our side? I'm going to come to Thames Water in a second. Can we do anything else from our side where we know roads now have very high insurance to, and if you don't know it, we'll just have to come back with a plan to bring those insurance things down by assuring the insurance companies that we've made a structural change in the likelihood of flooding from our side. I'll come on to Thames Water in a second.
Yeah, thank you very much, Leader. Yes, as you said, we've done quite a lot already. Obviously, it's not enough because properties are still being flooded. And I think it's important that we work together with Thames Water and the residents so that we're actually a bit more strategic about where we put these measures in, so that we're actually understand the system and we're also understanding what's happening on the ground. And then we can understand, where the flooding is going to happen and where the pressure is. So what we're trying to do is move the pressure points basically, and if we can move them to a place which is causing less harm, that would be immediately.
Okay. All right. I'm going to come back to you in a second because I think I know what we need to do. But Thames Water, if we know someone has now extremely high insurance, possibly can't get insurance against flooding, which is going to be some of the instances, they are in a very difficult scenario. What can Thames Water do to help us change the grading that those insurance companies have given?
So it depends on the source of the flooding. If it is surface water flooding flowing overland into the property, then that is where we need to work closely with the borough. Yeah. If it's sewer flooding, where the flooding is coming through your sewer connection up inside your property, then that is where we will, through this sewer flooding resilience program, hopefully be able to install something that manages that risk. As part of the agreement for our installation, you will have a formal piece of paperwork that you will be able to show to your insurers, which, depending on your insurers, may help to reduce the premium. Now, insurers are going to be seeking to recover the massive costs that they've had in paying this out. So premiums are going to go up. However, if you do shop around and go to some of the bigger brokers, you should be able to find a more competitive rate. But
what I'm asking, is it possible, given that the insurance company have just seen that this a property has been flooded twice in, 15 years, say, and so it's very hard to get insurance. Is it possible for the council and for Thames Water, which is what I think we need to do, by the way, is it possible for us to come forward with a plan and then change the insurance rating? Like you can change your credit rating, if you pay your bills on time and all that type of stuff. Is it possible for us to change the insurance rating? Have you given that any consideration? And do you have any insight that you can do on that front?
What I was asking Alex, just to explain, if we just give him a second, is because if flooding has happened in other parts of the country as well, there is work between the water sector, government, and insurers. So if we just give Alex just 1 second, because that I think is the way we can feed into this.
Okay.
We can't influence individual insurers, but there is a mechanism by which there is a collaborative.
Let's do that. We've got.
We'll do it quickly, honestly.
I'm happy to extend the meeting because there's one more question, but I do want to try and get some actions out of
So
this.
I was going to say there's also something called Flood Re, which is a program that provides affordable in. Yeah.
Sounds great, but from the background here, where most of the people afford that.
Okay. Yeah. I was all I was going to say is that there is a government-supported program called Flood Re that gets all insurance companies to pay into a fund that then insurance companies insuring people in high flood risk areas can draw down from, that limits the amount that the premiums go up. It does come up with some restrictions, but frankly, the provision of insurance is not something I'm able to speak comprehensively about.
We do have an insurance expert that we've been talking to. So I will absolutely take the feedback you're given, and I'll commit. I can't promise to solve the problem, but we'll absolutely look at Flood Re and see if we can influence that.
Well,
I can't promise it, but we'll definitely take it away.
We need to make it an action point, because if people can't get insurance and then they can't get flood stuff put in before June, then this hell is all going to happen again to them. So I think we have to do 2 things. One, obviously, we need the action plan, and we've been through that, but we need that really very quickly. I think that's very clear. 2, I think we need some type of mechanism to either, Thames Water is very powerful. We can lobby as elected representatives, but we need some type of plan to change people's insurance, because it is an unreasonable extra charge, what with the cost of living increase and everything else, to try. If you can't get your house flooded, then you're essentially blighting those areas. I think we need to have a working party on that.
So Leader, we'll commit to join a working party.
Right.
I don't know what the answer will be, and I've been trying to be very honest in everything I've said.
Well, no, I can see
but
that.
I will absolutely commit to you. We will join a working party and do our best to help.
Well, I think we will do that, and we will try and get some insurance people along as well. But I think that's a way forward, is because it doesn't seem there's a clear answer on that yet. So I think we will try and do that. Okay. Can I've got 2 more people here, Sarah. It's only because I've called you twice. And I am keen that all the people who are tuning in get a chance. I've got Susanna Cohen again, but before I do that, I've got Kay's iPhone. So Kay, and then Susanna.
Hi, I think that might be me, Catherine. Can you hear me?
Yes, I think it is you, because so
Hi.
yes, we can.
Yes, my question also on the chat was, what plan is there by Thames Water and or the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham to protect homes from surface water flooding caused by the street drains, the gullies and the street drains being overwhelmed during heavy rainfall, causing flood water to build up in the street, which then enters homes at ground level and through lightwell grills down into basements? The flips and the non-return valves won't help in that scenario. The Victorian combined sewer network across much of London, and certainly in Fulham and Hammersmith, is clearly of insufficient capacity to handle these increasingly frequent summer extreme storms. SUDs might help, but what about the basic option of just increasing the capacity or of the combined sewers, or adding dedicated storm drains to handle these storm events? If everyone, imagine the scenario where you invested 100% flips and MVRs, and most basement conversions these days have one or other automatically installed as part of the development works. That means, thankfully, no flood water directly into basements, but therefore there's still the water to be handled by the system that can't take it away quick enough. So that will just increase the risk of the streets flooding and water entering at ground level. What's the plan for the bigger picture of climate change and upgrading the sewers?
Okay, thank you, thank you, Catherine. Susanna.
Hi, yes, thank you. I just wanted to reiterate my question, actually, because I don't think it was addressed, and I think it has been raised by people several times. I'm also on Overstone Road, so interested to hear that we do actually have SUDs already. I was quite excited about those until I had that. So yes, just reiterating the question of when Thames Water say, you're going to be looking into and these people and doing your lovely surveys and offering help, is that all of us, or if we've already been told and contacted by you and told that if we haven't flooded at least twice, we're not eligible, are we already ruled out? That's what I'd like to know.
On that point, and I apologise, Susanna, I thought I got through all the questions, but so thank you for correcting me there. Right, can we answer Susanna's question first, please? And then we can come on to Catherine's question, and then there's a couple more people in the room.
So in response to Susanna's question, if we have you on record as having flooded through a submission of a sewer flooding questionnaire, yes, we will come out and survey your property. What you were told earlier, the programme has now, our thinking has now moved on, and we are now making that commitment to come out and survey properties. To respond to Catherine's question, Catherine, are you a drainage engineer by any chance? Because that was a very well informed question. I think this is partly what we want the independent review to help frame, is what is the scale of the challenge and what is the basic hierarchy of measures we need to be working collectively to apply. Simply installing new flips doesn't create any new capacity in the network. There will be opportunities to remove pinch points and tactical upgrade capacity in the network, but this storm dropped millions of cubic meters of water on London. We cannot build a network big enough to hold that. The Tideway tunnel that's being built has a capacity of 1.6 million cubic meters, so it would have filled the Tideway tunnel. The future of London cannot be digging these ginormous tunnels under the city. We need to look at a multiple tiered approach where we're looking at slowing down the water, absorbing it on the ground, improving pinch points and then removing pinch points in the network, tactical increases in capacity, looking at how we can move water from flood risk areas
Let me
into other
just cut you off
storage.
there, Alex, because we are going through that. Just on two things that Catherine raised, storm drains. So we talked a lot about flips and non-return valves. What about putting storm drains into somewhere like Overstone Road or Hammersmith Grove or all the other areas that have been flooded?
Yeah. So when I said
and secondly, surface water, which I think was a point also raised. What is it about the surface water in the last floods? What role did that play? Bram had said that the surface water stayed on the surface. Other people said it's come into their homes. What data do we have on the surface water being part of that flooding?
So what the independent review are doing is they're using our computer models to try and work out where that surface water flowed through. So once the sewer was full, the sewer starts backing up. Where is that water going? Corroborated with the evidence we're getting from people's sewer flooding questionnaires. So we get this picture of where it's coming from, where it's going to. That then enables us to say, well, how do we manage that quantity of water? And this is where the local authorities' surface water management plans come in. And we work closely with them to say, well, this is the volume of water we need to keep out of the system because it won't fit in the drains. How do we manage that? What measures can you apply through your planning system, through the buildings you own, through the services you provide, can you use to help us address that water? It is a complex multi-party solution that is going to take a while, but the flips and the other measures we're installing are at least a short-term process to protect people from sewer flooding. On the long-term issue of surface water flooding, it needs the big picture, it needs the big plan.
Okay, well, I can say on the surface water flooding that there's a lot of schemes going in around. There's a lot of schemes going in around the borough. So for in the Brackenbury area, then there is the Better Brackenbury project, which has the surface water scheme as part of it. And indeed, I don't know if we have considered storm drains next yet in that scheme, but that sounds like an idea that should be considered, Catherine. But there is the idea that we take water off the surface, put it in and keep it in the ground and not in the sewer is an essential part of how London needs to develop. Okay, I'm just going to come to Andy Slaughter, who's the MP and has been covering a lot of stuff in Parliament on this. So I'm just going to let him take a question or two or make a point.
Steve, thank you. Thank you for Thames Water for the meeting. I mean, and the questions particularly because we have, I think we've identified what are the main issues here. I just want to try and pin down Thames Water on where we go next. Because we had your presentation, which had sort of short, medium, long term. We've got the independent inquiry, and we've got the clock ticking towards possible other floods within a few weeks or months from now. And I haven't really, well, let me put my cards on the table. I've got a terrible sense of deja vu that I went to a meeting, more than one meeting like this in 2007, after the last one. Some of the people here may have been at those meetings as well. And what we decided then, or rather what you decided then, is we'll have short-term measures, flips, non-return valves, and then we'll have long-term measures. And the principal one of those was the Countess Creek, sir. I went to literally dozens of meetings. We really drilled down where individual sites for the entry points for Countess Creek were, looking at individual streets, about 7, 8 years, sometimes monthly meetings. And then one day you turn around and you said, we don't need Countess Creek. We can do it all with flips and non-return valves. And I believe that because I'm not an expert. And so I thought that we wouldn't be in this position again. And so I'm now sort of really quite distressed, I suppose, that we're here, but not as distressed because I've got my database of every single case on here. It's a constituent who's contacted me with some of the stories you heard tonight, which are really heartrending and terrible stories of destroying people's lives. So what are you going to do? Firstly, I mean, I think we know what we want you to do. We want you to get on and make properties safe so people can feel secure in their own homes, if that means flips and non-return valves. So I'd like to know, because it's the first time I've heard about it tonight, these are the £10 million and the 9 zones, which areas they're going to cover, which streets, which properties they're going to cover, if you can share that information with us. And then what is this longer term, and why doesn't it involve, as the lady just said a few moments ago, expanding the sewer network where necessary? This isn't a Thames tunnel. This was a 300, not a multi-billion pound project. It was a 300 million pound project to address what was seen as, I think, one of the 2 most overloaded parts of the sewage system in London. And I still can't see, particularly on surface flooding, if and it's a big if the gullies are clear, if the sewers are unblocked, then your problem is you don't have capacity there. And that's why you're getting surface flooding and things, surface water going to people's homes. And that happened nearly on my, I live off Ascot, it happened almost in my street in July as well. So why aren't we looking at that strategic expansions in the sewers? Because, let me end this, I've gone on too long, but from our point of view, a lot of us have been here a long time and we pay our water bills. You seem, and I know you're a new team, but you're still Thames Water, you're still the statutory undertaker who's been running the sewers for the last 100 years. And you sort of come to us tonight as if you're sort of troubleshooters who've landed by helicopter, found this terrible sewage system, and you'll see what you can do about it. And that's not the way I think we look at it. We think, just as citizens and as people who pay our bills, we have the right to be able to not have our homes flooded, whether it's surface water flooding or that. So can you, if you can't answer it all tonight, can you put something around to us, all the people who've got the database and everything now for this meeting, what's actually going to happen when, in terms of securing individual properties, and what your plan is? It might modify slightly with the independent review, but what your plan is for that longer term strategic ambition. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to ask a water company.
So look, thank you. I mean, and look, the first thing I say is when I'm someone like this coming to a company, I have to accept responsibility for the history. There's no point me joining a company like Thames Water or my boss Sarah, who I think you've met, who actually, quite frankly, you go, oh, that's all somebody else's fault. You have to, so I'm now responsible for the history, good and bad, of Thames Water. That just goes with the kind of role that I take on. The reality is Thames Water doesn't have a very good reputation. And that's not down to our wonderful people in the streets and doing work. That's about senior people in roles and our previous shareholders. And one of the reasons we very specifically said we wanted this independent panel was we didn't think people would believe us again. And you've just said why, because you've been through this before. So to be perfectly frank, there was, yes, I will say these things, but I need it backed by something that's independent, that isn't Thames Water, that's not chaired, there's no one from Thames Water in that environment. So that's important. One, because we put real experts in there, because we think we need to get to the bottom of some proper answers, but also so that you're not just listening to a new set of people on the executive team or a new CEO or new shareholders.
So can I just cut to the quick, because we're running out of time. I'm quite happy to extend the meeting to get to the bottom of this, but it strikes me we're running out of time in two ways, not just in this meeting, but also in the spring is coming. The
Leader,
rains are
honestly,
coming.
I was going to come to that.
So what I want, and you have justified that you're sort of like honest broker, you, and I accept. I think everyone accepts that. What we want is the type of action. So there's what can we have done? What can we say to people who've been flooded, who may not be able to get insurance, who are questioning the liability and haven't got the money to go to a negligence lawyer? What can we say to them that is going to make them sleep easier tonight about what Thames Water will do? I will come on to anything the council needs to do in a minute, but what Thames Water needs to do to stop them going through this misery again. What is it you can say other than we've got to wait for the independent review and then we'll have a plan? And it's a bit vague at the moment, which is what I think we're getting. And I know it's coming from a good place from your perspective,
but with respect, Leader,
but we need more.
I don't think we're saying that. I think the first thing we're saying, and it is a perfectly reasonable request you've made for more details about the recoveries that Alex was talking about. That's perfectly reasonable. I will work with Alex to make sure that we get that information across. I suspect that may not mean we may be able to do 1,000 properties that we're already on our register. Hopefully more people register so we can add them on through tonight's process. But we will absolutely come back with a plan with detail on that. That's not to do with the independent review. So we will absolutely come on that.
All I would just say on that point is Brendan, Bram, Andy and I have been meeting with Alex and others for a long time and say, look, we've seen the meetings elsewhere. We've seen people getting angry and shouting. We don't think that's any use because what we really want is action. Okay. And we've been saying the main thing we want is not a lot of wordy presentation, but an action plan. And so here we are at this point on this date, and we still haven't got the sort of action plan that is going to make people sleep easier at night.
I think that's reasonable. But what I knew, and you've given a number of people here have shared stories of saying you've contacted us and you were told we wouldn't do this. So what I'm saying is, or what Alex is saying is, we've listened to that. It's not acceptable. I've been clear on that. We have changed the policy and we've immediately put 10 million in. And what you're asking for is perfectly reasonable. That's what we've got to do. But what we are saying is, if you've had that response to us, that no longer applies. And the process Alex is mapping out and building as quickly as we can. So we will come back with that plan.
Just on that 10 million.
Yes.
Is that for Hammersmith and Fulham? Is it for the whole of the area that was flooded?
It's an initial.
Over what time period?
It's an initial budget we have allocated now to back up the plan that Alex outlined.
On what time period?
Well, Alex, have we got a view on the...
Well, I mean, we want to get as many properties we can do as quickly as possible. I mean, I do not know sorry, apologies to people online. We want to do as many properties as we can do as quickly as possible. Okay, it is within, I've got the budget, I'm procuring the contractors to do it. I've got multiple teams building programs. I just can't tell you tonight that 9 Askew Road is going to be visited on the 31st of May.
Let's say this. If we, given that we've been trying to collate information as well, I'm very grateful to Brendan for the work he's done as well. If we manage to collate the information, there's a lot of people on the call who can email in as well. If we can say to you, we would like an action plan of actions, which is what I thought we'd have tonight, but if we haven't got it, if we can have and I only got this afternoon, we can have an action plan. We would like these actions and we would like them to begin to be enacted, at this date, and we'd like them to be completed at that date. And ideally, I would like that date, obviously it has to be practical, but I would like that date to finish before June. If we could say that, then to what, are you able to commit tonight to being able to, and we can try and put that into some other area of priority. Are you saying that you will be able to spend that type of money to act in that time frame, within a reasonable time frame?
We'll commit to come back with a plan. If you just took 1,000 properties, I think it's unlikely we could just install 1,000 flips by June. So we are going to, and that's just practical necessity without include closing roads, they include contract. There's a pragmatic, but we will come back to a plan with you, Leader. I'll work with Alex on that basis, and you can challenge us on that plan, but we will come back.
No, but look, we've had lots of meetings, and we're not, as I said, I did not want this to be everyone shouting at you, because you agree that you guys are folk, okay? I wanted it to be a series of questions and answers, and said, I don't want guff, I want actions. We haven't quite got the action plan that people need, and the people are coming from a place where their properties are being flooded, they can't get insurance, they don't know who's liable. I'm saying the number one thing that we're going to require is an action plan, given this is all coming round again.
I understand.
So when can we have an action plan that we can present to people here that will say these actions will go? I don't think 10 million quid's a lot. We're spending more than that. We'll spend more than that over 10 years on SUD schemes and other surface stuff. So 10 million sounds like a lot of money, but you're often talking, from our perspective, we're often spending up to tens and tens of millions on environmental changes. So it sounds like a lot of money. It's not that much if it's just for the whole area rather than just Hammersmith and Fulham. Can we get an action plan, and can we get it before the rains come?
So we'll definitely come back with an action plan, and I'll look at that with Alex over the next 2 days. I'll personally be involved kind of in that piece, but I'm not going to sit here because it would undo everything I've said and say, well, I'll guarantee it's done by June when I don't know that. So, because that would be foolish, and I'd just be yet another person who said something without backing it up. But I will commit.
If we could prioritize
to look at that with that.
If we could prioritize the worst affected areas, such as the lady at the back in Hammersmith Grove, if we could prioritize the worst effect, and we could say we think this house has been flooded 7 times.
We will commit to work with you, leader, and your team to help do the prioritization. I'm doing my best, because the minute I promise stuff that I've no idea if we can do, I'm no different than everyone else has been before. And I'm very taking on board your MP's kind of feedback, but I'm personally committing, and I will come back. We will definitely come back with a plan. I don't know every detail, and to be blunt, I'm not an engineer, and so, but we will come back with a plan. I'll personally come back and visit. So I won't just send it on an email. I'll personally come back with a plan. I'm very clear on the ask, and I'm not trying to kind of fudge my response. I'm committing that we will come back with Alex, and we'll come back and we'll do our best to come.
Look, if I'm sounding critical, it's because
I think it's reasonable you're critical. You're representing your residents.
It's Brendan will attest to the fact that we've had a lot of meetings, and we said we don't want a presentation, we don't want explanations about, we want a scientific explanation of the problems. What we really want is actions.
I understand.
So the reason we should have had the meeting before Christmas, but we've delayed it because we wanted an action plan. So I'm disappointed because we haven't got a solid action plan at the moment. And like I said, I got this afternoon. We've put a lot of effort in to try and help you get an action plan on this.
I understand.
Brendan.
I wanted to thank Thames Water actually for coming tonight and giving the presentation that they have. But what I think is important is that up until now, the letters they've written to most of the residents have been to say, we can't do anything, we're not doing anything, we're not putting in a flip, it's too much rain, end of story. If that plan has changed in terms of customer service, I think the very least you should do is write to all the people who've communicated with you and say, our plans have changed, we are looking at the installation of flips, we are looking at the installation of NRVs and other measures we can take to protect your properties. It would give a degree of reassurance that I feel people really want. The other thing is that the real thing I've been saying to Alex for some time is you need to visit the streets. Collating information from a pile of forms, which may or may not be complete, which may or may not be accurate, which people may not know about the history of flooding of their property, is not going to get you anywhere. You've got to get feet on the streets, and you've got to go and knock on people's doors and say, we've got a note that your neighbour was flooded on the 12th of July. Were you flooded also? You've actually got to get out there with boots on the ground and identify all the properties which were not only flooded, but were also vulnerable if they're adjacent to properties that have been flooded. It's not a difficult thing to do. I've been suggesting this to you for at least 6 months, that this is something you need to do, and we're still talking about filling in forms. It just seems to me to be crazy. Last thought is that you say you're going to identify the vulnerable. Unless you go down and knock on everybody's door, how are you going to know who lives there and whether they're vulnerable? What judgment are you going to make as to whether a nurse with 5 children is more vulnerable than an elderly pensioner? How are you going to identify who is the most vulnerable and therefore at the top of your list for an installation? Some of it may be slightly more obvious than others, it may not be. But again, unless you get out there, you talk to individuals, you see who's there in the streets, and you look at other measures, maybe the council can help you with identifying people. That's the only way you can solve this problem. And then you can come back with a plan.
I think that's absolutely, we need an action plan, which is what we thought we were getting tonight. Right, I'm going to let the meeting go over. So I'm going to take a couple more questions from people. You, sir.
So we talked a lot about
Thank you. And then, sir.
Leader, can I just say a word about insurance? I mean, I live in Lime Grove, and my neighbour here, you don't mind me referring to George, was flooded just after he'd finished renovating his flat. And I think the people who are flooded are by far the most important people in this room, by the way, and my heart goes out to them. But there are multiples of residents who are facing a time bomb, and that's insurance. We have just renewed our insurance half an hour before the deadline. Most insurers will not come near us. We can get buildings insurance, not flood insurance. The implication of that is that mortgages will be withdrawn and we will lose all of our money. That's how serious the situation is. You can't have a mortgage and not have cover. The flood RE does not cover most of the properties in Shepherd's Bush. They're extremely helpful, but it doesn't. And the point I wanted to make about it is, to give you an example, we were initially quoted a premium of 20 times, and then they said, no, we won't do it. We finally settled on a premium that's 4 times as much, but with a £30,000 excess if we flood again, and need £30,000. And we've got to come up with that in cash. Now, the problem I have is that there's lots of people in this borough cannot afford £30,000 and an excess. They're not insured. They're never going to be able to pay that. But the main thing is what the insurers time and time again said is, we need to see evidence of mitigation. We are not insuring. You are absolutely going to be flooded again. This is why the risk is. We need something from Thames Water and, if possible, from the council in writing that says this is what we are going to do to reduce the risk. And by the way, they were most interested in flips. Flips were by far the thing that insurers said would help them accept the risk. But what we're not talking about is accepting risk premiums. There's another flood in June. There'll be whole swathes of this borough will be uninsurable. And I don't know what people are going to do. So so if you can come up with hard written things that we can take to presentations to underwriters that say, look, here is how the risk is manageable, because otherwise I think in another year we're not going to be insurable.
I think that's right. Yeah. And I mean, you're absolutely right, sir. And I think what we do need is a complete review of what type of solutions we can come up with. Some of them we may be able to do. Some of them we might be able to lobby government to change. But I think we cannot have a situation where people can't get their homes insured and then they lose everything and they're essentially bankrupt or wiped out. It's an impossible situation. So I think we need to look at that. So that's one of the action points from this meeting. And I thank you for that. Just on this gentleman's point, is that yours? All right, thank you. That's just on this gentleman's point is, I remember when Hammersmith Grove was flooded in 2007, and it was a similar story. I think Andy was there, and we had the same conversation about non-return valves. It was all at the time that everything was the solution is the non-return valve, and it became evident we didn't know which houses had non-return valves and which didn't. And then Percy Road was flooded shortly afterwards, and again we didn't know which houses had non-return valves and which did. Surely the solution, and I know at the time they had robots going down the sewers that could look at the things, I think is what I was advised, if my memory is playing true. Why is it that we still don't know who's got non-return valves and who has? Why is that not being done? And what are you going to do on that front? Is that your question, sir? Right.
It's just understanding the position of the mines. I don't see that we know their properties. To pick up that information. You don't know if there's fundamental problems with mines, flow of sewage and the capacity from the mines. You don't know until this is civil engineer. No, I totally understand. And
So given that this is
you'll appreciate we have quite a lot of civil engineers in Thames Water as well. So there's a huge amount of maintenance and checking, response to customer support that we do. But I'm perfectly clear, it is almost certain, and we've said this publicly, a considerable amount of money needs to be spent on the London network. There was a conscious priority decision made to spend that initial piece of money on the Tideway Tunnel, one of the biggest engineering projects in the world, and that's where a lot of that element has gone.
Just to clarify, because I do remember talking to Richard Ayard about that at the time the Thames Tideway Tunnels come in. It doesn't actually help the flooding problem. It just deals with the pollution of the Thames, doesn't it?
Well, it undoubtedly will help with the pollution with the Thames. There's also one of the things that Alex talked about earlier was one of the challenges when the flooding came was it wasn't able to go into the Thames because of the time. So it would have helped with that, but it doesn't solve the problem, but it would have certainly helped with that aspect. So I totally understand the point. One of the things we want from the independent panel is to help give us evidence that we have to then present through the process that goes all the way through to us submitting what we want to do in the next 5-year business plan, because we're talking about a considerable amount of work. But I want to be very clear on this. We have to construct that out because that will then flow through to customer bills. So we have to put that plan out in how we do that.
Without footage and inspection, how do you know?
Maybe if I can answer that. So we have 110.
So just for the people at home, because they're not on the microphone. So the question is, without CCTV, how do you know which homes are at risk? How do you know the condition? How do you know the condition of the trunk mains if you haven't surveyed it? And my additional question is, I was told you were going to survey it back in 2007. When the last set of floods have happened. So how are we in a place where we still don't know that? How did that happen? Which is, I suppose, a retrospective question. But going forward, how do you know what the standard quality of your mains are like?
I'm happy to answer that if I can get a moment.
Can we give Alex a chance to answer? Because he's a member of my team, so I just want to. He actually has a lot more engineering experience than I do. So because we really do understand the question. I know you've answered it twice, so we've got it. Alex.
So we have 110,000 kilometres of sewer network in our area. That's enough to go around the world 2.5 times. What we have is an increasing number of sewer depth monitors in the sewers that tell us about the flow. We carefully compare that flow against computer models that tell us what we expect to be seeing in that, according to what the weather is, according to what time of day it is. We also are carefully monitoring blockages to understand whether interruptions of flow. Sometimes those are reported by customers. We have 70,000 complaints a year from customers telling us about blockages. That's sort of the late warning system. We're trying to move towards an early warning system. We use that. We look at sewer gradient. We look at the number of fast food outlets. We have this complex model that tells us where do we think sewers need cleaning more frequently. We know that we have problem sewers. A lot of the trunk sewers we know need more regular cleaning, and we use regular CCTVing, and we have this rolling program building an ever better picture. So we understand.
Just to be a bit more specific, because this is interesting, but I know we're running out of time. But I'm quite happy for the meeting to go on, by the way. But if we know, for example, Hammersmith Grove got flooded in 2007, and there was lots of people in Hammersmith Grove, which is just taking that one area as an example, then are you able to say now, in 2022, that you know who've got flips, who's got non-return valves, and what the state of the sewer is in that what we know to be a flood hotspot? Same with Percy Road, same with Lime Grove. These were all places that have been flooded previously. I dealt with a lot of the places in 2007 because it's in my ward in Hammersmith Grove, and surely you must know those areas. And are you able to say you've got that, or is that still something you don't know about?
No, so we will know the sewers that we've cleaned. We will know the approach we took. Did we CCTV them beforehand? Did we jet wash them? Did we suction pump them? We will know that information, and there were records to show exactly what we did and where. We will, following the flood, we will also...
Just again on that, if you're a resident and a lot of people mentioned the roads they live in, are you able to tell us what the state is of those particular roads that we know to be flood hotspots, like Hammersmith Grove, Overstone Road?
I will be able to, well,
Iffley Road, yes. I don't missing you out.
We'll be able to tell you when that sewer was last cleaned. We will be able to tell you whether we found any defects in that, because we also have a parallel program around sewer collapses. We will be able to tell you where we have installed an NRV or a flip. But if someone has unilaterally done that and not told us, we cannot tell you that unless it is something we will have picked up in one of those recent CCTVs. As I said, we have 110,000 kilometers of network, and we have a rolling program of managing those, but we cannot, with infinite money probably, understand dynamically every yard of every sewer. And therefore we take a risk-based approach to focus on those areas where we think the risk of flooding has the highest probability, or where there is the highest consequence of whether that flooding were to happen. That is what I can tell you.
Yeah. Well, I think that should be an action point. We've got lots of roads here that are all coming up. We need to make sure we marry the list of roads we know had the worst flooding, and then get information to see what you know about them. Because just because, as Andy Slaughter said, we know some roads were badly flooded within very recent memory, and we don't want them to be flooded again. At the very least, we would expect that sort of data to be collated and be acted on. So we will follow up on that to see if we can give us that list.
So as I said, as part of the sewer flooding resilience program, we will be surveying the sewers in the areas that were flooded. So I've said that we will do that. So that should cover that point. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sir and sir. Say that again, please.
The question about Countess Creek has been raised
a
number of times and hasn't been answered. So clearly at some point there was institutional failure about that decision. Why isn't that going to happen again?
Yeah, no, thank you for reminding me of that. Countess Creek, I'll hand over to Thames Water. I just want to correct something this gentleman said first, if that's okay. We didn't campaign to stop Countess Creek. We campaigned, there was two options, one to send it down Hammersmith Grove and one to send it down the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. And we successfully lobbied for it to go down Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. That was what our lobbying was. It was not to have it stopped. No, I promise you that was our lobbying. We were very much in favour of it. We just thought it would be better to have the pipes into the sewer in KNC rather than Hammersmith and Fulham. In terms of the need for Countess Creek, can we just deal with that? Because Andy Slaughter's raised it, this gentleman's raised it, and a couple of other people raised it. Why did Countess? Are you going to come in on Countess Creek? All right, go on in.
The point that I'd also like to echo again is the liability question. Now, if I was a sharp lawyer, which I'm not, but if I was, we've heard Andy Slaughter MP say that he remembers having precisely the same discussions in 2007. from your own statistics, which you showed us on the PowerPoint, you've had extreme flooding in 2016, in 2018, in 2020, twice in July in 2021, once in October in 2021. Now, that to me doesn't sound like a 1 in 300 years or a 1 in 30 years incident. It sounds, if I can add up correctly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times in the space of 6 years. That's once a year, where I come from. Right. So here's a man who's done his homework. In fact, I have your speech here, and I was commend you on that, if I may. Now, as I say, if I was a sharp lawyer, I would say, well, you know, once is an accident, twice is bad luck, but 6 times in 6 years is downright incompetent. And I would say that actually brings liability with it automatically. Don't you think that's true?
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm going to go back to this gentleman's view on Counters Creek. Why was it cancelled, given that it was meant to stop this type of stuff? Why did it get cancelled, and why do we not now need it? And should we not have it? Should that not be one of the action points that we're asking you to fix?
I don't have chapter and verse on this. Is my colleague Andrew Hagger on the line? Because he is we may be able to give the expertise answer required for this. Andrew, are you online? Right, maybe not. I mean, clearly, I'm sorry, he may not have been able to attend for the
I can answer what I was told. I can answer what I was told, because we've asked that question many, many times. We didn't want Counters Creek abolished. We wanted it in KNC, but we didn't want it abolished. We thought it was very important, largely because I'd visited lots of people's homes and seen the brown water covering their fridges, their bed linen, the photographs of their long deceased grandparents, etc. So we were told this was going to be the solution. And then when it ended, we were told it was no longer needed as a solution because they were going for other measures which they thought would be more acceptable, such as flips. Now, given that that's what I was told previously, is that the case, or do we need Counters Creek?
My understanding, and if I'm incorrect, I will have to seek to clarify this if I've made any errors in it, but my understanding was that the plan was to install flips as an interim measure whilst we understood the efficacy of the sewer relief tunnel as a solution. As we then progressed in understanding and fitting the flips, we found that there were more interconnections between the network that meant that a single sewer relief tunnel would not have provided the cost-effective benefit. It would have been another 150 million on top of the 100 or so million it cost to install 1,200 flips, I think it is. So the decision was made that it was not cost-effective to continue with the tunnel when the high standard of protection of the flips protected the core properties that were modelled for the storm that we had in 2007. In 2016, I believe we had another major storm, and that basically validated, because there was minimal flooding, the decision not to continue with the tunnel. And therefore, we gave back the money. I want to ensure that it was not that we kept the money, we gave back the money that we did not spend and paid a penalty for not having delivered it. So that just to correct that position, I will double check my facts and we'll make sure we get chapter and verse to you to then choose if you want to circulate it to the people here. But I would point out that, as I said earlier, the rainstorm dropped a massive amount of water, over 1 million cubic meters.
What I will do, sorry, Alex, because what I will do is I'll formally write to you, leader, with the exact facts in the proper letter about those facts around Counters Creek. And Mr. Slaughter, if that's a point you want to make a broader point with, you'll have something from us, but we'll make sure we document that to you. Because as we said, we did have a colleague who was trying to join, wasn't able to kind of attend here, but we'll come back, because Alex, I think, but I don't want to put him on the spot to have to say more. So we'll come back formally, but I'll write to you.
Yeah, I think the problem with it is the bits of words I picked up was cost-effective benefits. And if it's just purely been done on, it would have helped, but they decided it would cost too much and the benefits weren't great, then I don't know how I would like to see the numbers that came up with that, because every time someone's flooded and can't get insurance, then I don't think that would be taken into your cost-effective benefit analysis. But you're talking millions of pounds of damage. And if this is to happen every few years, which we think climate change, as you said in your presentation, will produce, then not having something like the Counters Creek sewer for cost to benefit reasons, I'd like to see those numbers of how that cost to benefit analysis has been done. So if
I will write to you and I'll share that. Just to be clear, which I think is Mr. Law's point, it's not Thames Water's cost benefit analysis. It is a regulated cost benefit analysis we all work to. But I will share the information that we are able to with you.
Okay.
But I'll do it formally, so you have a proper letter.
Well, okay. I would just, I mean, what I don't want to do, having been this sort of Groundhog Day effect, is I don't want to be here in the future with another bunch of people or even the same people flooded out again. So if the Counters Creek will have stopped the flooding in Hammersmith Grove, Overston Road, Iffley Road, possibly even Lime Grove and all of that whole stretch we saw on that map, then I would like to see how we get, because this is going to happen, there's going to be a lot more floods happening in the future. I would like to see how we get that back on the agenda. Alex.
So this is one of the things we've explicitly asked the independent review to look into, was what effect, if any, would the Counters Creek solution have had on the flooding of the 12th of July? My estimation is that because a massive amount of water fell, the Counters Creek would have absorbed some of that water and maybe had some impact, but it would not have been extensive and it would not have avoided the hundreds of homes that were flooded. The solution we've got to work on is that, as I outlined, multiple levels of things about slowing the water, absorbing it, in property level protection for those most vulnerable properties, removing pinch points in our network and optimizing our systems, but also working with you, the council, to make sure that water is not flooded.
All I would say is
vulnerable properties.
All I would say is, people keep asking about the liability issue. If Counters Creek would have stopped the problem, it comes back to the liability issue. So I just think we need some genuinely independent analysis on whether that would have stopped it, because the priority here is it doesn't happen again. And then this gentleman made a series of points which I've forgotten. So if you could make them again, please, in your question.
Thank you. Yeah, just to abbreviate them. The point was that this 1 in 300 years is what it was originally called, I believe, and then it was 1 in 30 years, but it isn't, is it? It was in 2007, 2016, 2018, 2020, 2021, twice in July, once in October. So that's 6 times in the space of 6 years. And then if we reflect on what Mr. Slaughter, Andy Slaughter MP said, he had déjà vu. This was all done in 2007, discussed in 2007. So what are we going to do? Repeat ourselves in 10 years and 15 years when possibly you may not be in the positions you're in. Some of us might not even be here. It's something does need to be done. Not just to whinge and to gripe, but would perhaps not a solution be for those who have been affected, who haven't been able to have insurance, that Thames Water says, well, there is something, and it's awfully old-fashioned, but it's called ethics. And that there is, I'm sure, a fund somewhere at Thames Water that would say, well, those people who have been affected, who don't have insurance because it wasn't possible to get any contents insurance, like the nurse who spoke earlier, like my sister, that there's somehow a way of ameliorating this problem. And then looking ahead, perhaps Thames Water, it might be cheaper to discuss with insurance companies to have a sort of insurance RE, but not for just flats, maybe for all your customers. And when you said, oh, these are the leaders' constituents, well, they're your customers. And I thought that was rather telling that that wasn't recognized. I also thought it was rather telling that I'd spoken to Dr. Bastick, Jessica Bastick, who does your floods and so on. She did her PhD in sewage and flooding, and very capable lady indeed. So she was on the Zoom call as well. That surely it's possible to negotiate something with your insurers and their reinsurers, that it might be cheaper to provide an insurance cover for those people who are not eligible for under the existing insurance RE or insurance RE, that we say, well, all inhabitants, all those 985 people whose cellars were flooded will be covered if their own insurers do not cover them. Because when you say, oh, we're not liable, and the council might say the same, or if you would decent, and I'm sure you all are very decent people, you would say, well, maybe we should get together and share the risk, share the liability. The one person who's not liable is the nurse who was over there, or any of our others who are not insured for sewage flooding. And it's all very elegant to sort of, Thames Water to push the blame on the council, and the council say, well, we've got to prove it was water flooding. Well, that's not any of our jobs. Yeah. Everyone's job here is to pay their water bills and to have a degree of protection that their assets are not destroyed through no fault of their own.
Thank you. Very good. So these are all very good points. Yeah, I'm saying these are very good points that we'd need to take up in the insurance side, but he's made a number of other points as well. So I'll give you.
I think I did use customer on a number of times. And when I described constituent, that was out of respect. You're clearly constituents, you're clearly residents, and you're clearly customers. And to be honest, quite consciously, I used all those terms at different times because I wanted to respect on that basis. But I am very clear you are my customers. It's one of my core responsibilities. I do take the point that you make on liability, and I absolutely note it. We are not responsible for the flood. We are absolutely part of the solution to the flooding. And to be open, if all of the solution is on Thames Water, and by the way, I don't think, Leader, you suggested that at all. You've suggested a partnership. It will fail. So it absolutely has to be a really broad approach in terms of how we're going to make sure all of you, as our customers and as the leaders, constituents, etc., are protected. We're committed to work with all of the bodies and are working hard to do that. And look, the reason we fundamentally set up the independent panel was because, again, for things like Counters Creek, I could have said, I could give you an answer, we didn't need that. You won't believe it. So I consciously wanted to set that up, and we are respecting the time they need, but in order to come back to make sure there's expertise around that. I've committed to work with insurance. That the Flood Re is not a Thames Water or even a water sector. We're part of a partnership on it, but I absolutely said, I'm not an expert on it, but absolutely said I would go away and talk to our lead on the insurance. And my last comment, Leader, is that we do have a hardship fund. It's managed by a separate trust that we as put money in, because quite rightly, they need to make the decision on vulnerable customers. And we have been able to help a number of vulnerable customers who've been impacted through this. But the decision is made by that hardship fund, and we put money into the hardship fund so that they can independently make those decisions. So we do that.
What people are interested in is action. So in terms of a hardship point, there's people in this room who would want to know about hardship fund. So we need to get to a point of action. Is every question being answered? Or is there anything we've missed? It's a lot going on. Yeah. Right. So all the people who have attended in the room, we have your details. We will write to you. All the people who've tuned in, we have also different details, unless you've just watching on YouTube, in which case we don't have your details. And what we would ask you to do is to email us. And I would suggest that we're going to set up a, I would suggest you email us at the council, email me, stephen.cowan@lbhf.gov.uk. I'm the leader of the council. I'm responsible for whatever happens here. So email us and we will collate that. And that leads me then to the action points that I think we've got, which is, and I've tried to get everybody, is there anybody online, sorry, who had a point that they don't think's been raised or that we haven't addressed and you have raised? No. In which case, yeah, sorry, sure.
If I furnish that to you, I'll write to you, email you later, and we'll give you that so you can share it when you write to everybody.
Yeah.
Would that be easiest?
That's fine. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so let's go through the action points I think we're trying to get to. The first thing I think we want is, in terms of prioritizing the action plan, which is this lady's point, is we want a list of the many roads that have been flooded, because Thames Water did say you had to be flooded twice for action. We've got, as Andy says, records of lots of flooding, a list of all the main roads that have been flooded. And then we want to take this gentleman's point, do we know the state of the sewers in those roads? So we will be writing to say, at least assure us, because I think that would be negligent, to tell you the truth, if you didn't know it, given some of these roads have been flooded before. But we want to marry up that list and have a reassurance that you have got that detail and that you have an action plan for fixing those non-return valves in those roads and understanding which houses have flips and what might be the consequence of that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there's a genuine problem with insurance. People can't get it. To have it 206.7% increase in your insurance is an impossible scenario. And there'll be other people just won't be able to even get the damn thing. So we're going to set up an insurance task group. But as this gentleman said, we may well be able to tap into your insurance, or we may be able to get government to guarantee something, because this is going to be a problem going forward a lot. And we just simply can't have a number of our citizens in that dreadful predicament. So we'll work with you on that, but we would like a genuine, it may be that you have the financial resource in London to sort of do something with all the relationship with your own insurers to be able to do something. But we will try and come back with an insurance plan. And if there are any insurance experts watching in, then the way we operate as a council is to ask people to work with us as commissioners. If you have expertise, then we would be welcome hearing it, but we will commission our own formally, but we're always interested in hearing any informal expert advice. And that, I think, needs to be in action. The next, I'm going to ask Bram very briefly. The surface water, Bram was saying that it doesn't necessarily contribute to the problem. In some cases, it helps the problem if there's a flood on the road rather than in the sewer during a flood. But what we do know is if there is a flood on the road and it then floods your house, as happened on Goldhawk Road, due to, well, actually, that was a bad example, actually, because that was due to utility works going on and they broke the sewer. But if that surface water is affecting it, then I will make sure, because I'm told, we've had this conversation, I'm told that it's very frequently gullies are cleaned and that people can get them cleaned. I will make sure that we do a complete review of that. If you are watching in and you think a gully is dangerous near you, email me at Stephen with a ph.cowan, C-O-W-A-N, at lbhf.gov.uk, and I will have a team down there acting on that as quickly as we can. In terms of the SUD schemes, we are putting record amounts of SUD schemes in. There's different schemes all around where we're trying to take some roads, extend them with new areas of drainage. I like the idea from Catherine of super drainage ditches. And whilst that is sort of what a SUD scheme is, we will look to explore to see if there's anything on that. That might be something Thames Water have. But if the council can do something innovative that's not being done anywhere else in London, then we would like to be in that position. So I will take Catherine's point up. But I would say to all residents, if you want some type of SUD scheme in your neighbourhood, you want to have a comprehensive greening scheme that includes trees that suck up the water, lifting up paving, lifting up tarmac and replacing it, then we are very open-minded to that. We have committed large amounts of money to it over the next 10 years, and it is something we're going to be driving forward. And the easiest way to change someone's landscape in their neighbourhood is with the support of the people who live in the neighbourhood. So if you want something, then we're very happy to work in partnership, as indeed we are doing with the Brackenbury Village Better Brackenbury scheme. I think it's vital that we begin to change the surface water. In terms of the action plan from Thames Water, I think it is disappointing we haven't got one, to tell you the truth, because the reason we had 7 or 8 meetings was to say, we don't want you shouted at, we want an action plan. It would be very easy for me as a politician to play you as the bad guys, and I didn't want to do that. I just want to get action. So it's disappointing you haven't got that, but what I want is an action plan that looks at Councils Creek. If it's cancelled for cost-benefit analysis, I'd like to see that and I'd like to review it, because it does strike me there's a possibility that we wouldn't have had these floods if we had Councils Creek, and the flips aren't a satisfactory replacement for it because of the reasons that I think everyone's discussed. Next, we want an action plan that deals with people who have been flooded quicker than anywhere else. So we want to be able to get things done before June. So if we know there is a particular district likely to get flooded in another flash environmental catastrophe, then I I would like to make sure we prioritize that. And I would like that really done by the end of March. I would like to see something like an action plan at the very latest. Ideally, I'd like it by the end of February, but I think end of March, I don't know if I'm being too reasonable. But I think we want to see that in a documented form, and we will share that with residents as and when we get it. That's all the action points I think we've managed to get through so far. Is there anything else you want me to raise before we close the meeting? Yes, we will. We'll organise another follow-up meeting, maybe at the end of March, to go through that action plan, and to try and see if we can get something comprehensive to doing. I did note, by the way, just because the hottest temperature on Earth was recorded in Death Valley, California, 3 days before we had floods in London, and 4 days before we saw all of Central Europe flooded with lots of lives lost. So there is a genuine issue going on with climate change. The solutions are porous land, definitely. The sewer system isn't suitable, and that does need to be improved, and we're going to have to hold the utility company to account on that. But there are other solutions as well. So wherever we can take any action to protect that Hammersmith and from that happening again, it is a partnership with residents, because it is the neighbourhood we all live in, and we've got to have some consensus on driving those things forward, because we are committed to acting quickly with our residents in tandem. So can I first of all thank everyone for coming? Thank you very much for all of you attending, for asking your questions. Thank you to Brendan, who has given us heroic levels of knowledge on behalf of the Brackenbury Residents Association, which is why we're so far ahead. Can I particularly thank Andy Slaughter as well for fighting our corner in Parliament on this front. The reason we're so information rich is in part because of the fantastic work Andy is doing. Can I thank Thames Water for coming and for committing to work with us in this way? We do look forward to working with them. We're not interested in beating people up. We're interested in action. And can I thank everybody else for tuning in and taking part in this? And I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.